So it's the three files that we worked on.
Comp plan update those.
If we get to,
Yeah, you're good.
Ready? I'm going to call this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission to order. We're meeting at 4:30. Inland Highway 2, San Fernando, first floor conference room. First item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody would stand, face the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to have a roll call, starting with Commissioner Whalen,
Commissioner Layton,
Commissioner Frankenbach,
Sean Scott,
Commissioner Sonstad.
Commissioner Davis, Commissioner Foltz.
Trying to.
All right, any announcements? Jake? Nope. All right, we'll move to the consent agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of January 6, 2023, which are on the drive. Any objections or corrections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll move to the first item of business. I understand that while we invited the Army Corps and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they didn't show up. So, unfortunately, because we had a lot of questions about the Army Corps for sure with regard to the wetlands decision. So we'll move on to the proposed or the vacation rental permits. We had I had a discussion along with Jake and a lot of the planning staff this morning with a company called Granicus. Granicus, I think it's Granicus. And I know the planning staff had a previous meeting with another company. What these companies do, let me preface this by my view that with regard to vacation rentals, if we don't have an enforcement mechanism, there's no reason to have regulations. There's probably a difference of opinion on that, but that's at least my initial thought. So I talked to the Coeur d'Alene code enforcement person. He recommended this company, Granicus. We had a conversation this morning, and I know that there's been previous conversations with a company called Deckard. What these companies do is they take, they have a software-based program that's pretty robust, and they identify vacation rentals that have not received a permit. And they are able to, through their software program and at least as far as Granicus, their follow-up with letters and so on to those properties that have vacation rentals that have not gotten a permit, and they get about, within the first year, they will get at least 65% of clients. There's about 1,000 vacation rental listings for Broward County. We're getting 30% right now. So basically, if you get 65%, you can do the math times a permit fee of $280, and you can start doing the math, and it's it's pretty significant revenue source that will cover the cost of, hopefully, will cover the cost of these outfits. They also have other enforcement tools. A hotline. I think both companies have a hotline where if there's a complaint about compliance with a property, you can call that. You actually talk to a person. They then contact the owner or the manager of that rental property and tell them that they need to comply. What the consequence there is something that we would have to discuss. So that's kind of where we left it. I would propose that we follow up with these companies, make sure we're getting apples to apples comparisons. I would think that we would want to consider retaining one of these companies to do enforcement. Jake, anything to add? Sure you do.
Yeah, so the initial fee is the 280, but then the renewal fees are much less. So we might get a significant increase the first year, but then ongoing, assuming everyone continues to renew, it'll be far less fee revenue income. Also, we need to consider the amount of staff time we currently already, and will, if we got more into compliance, we need fees to come to staff time to assess and review those files. So that's what the fee covers right now, is staff time. So could we double our income or increase the amount of revenue coming in to help cover a software solution? Absolutely. When I presented to the board, it was under an idea that we could potentially also assess some kind of tax on short-term rentals. That's not the case from since February. We kind of dove into whether or not we could do that. So I think part of this exercise of if we come to an agreement on what the change should be to the short-term rental code, you can include in your recommendation that the planning or that the Board of County Commissioners also consider a software solution to help with compliance. But I mean, those are all contracts that have to be signed by the board. The fees, if anything is changed, also has to be done by the board. So I don't know. I was just thinking through, like, we could talk through different software solutions and whatnot, but that all has to be done at the county commissioners have to be the ones to sign off on all that. So we could, hear different proposals or review different, ideas from different companies, but just kind of knowing that the commissioners are going to be the final say so on all of it. I think it is good to know that where we stand on the compliance side when we're crafting regulation is just how enforceable it is. So I did reach out to Bill and asked him to be here tonight. He said that if we have some specific questions relating to the legal side of this, to jot it all down and submit a list to him, and he can research it and get back to us. So I asked him specifically on, I think some of the questions we had last time was, how do we assess fees, fines, and whatnot. And I think it stands to where it was last time, which is, from his opinion, that fines have to be assessed by a deputized source, so it has to come through the sheriff's department. And the sheriff's department's been unwilling to enforce land use regulation and assess fines for violations of land use. So that's just kind of where we're at with it. We'll continue to do what we can. I think it's still good to look over regulation and come up with the best way to regulate it. And I think I put in your guys' drive the current draft of it, and we can go over that and see if you guys agree with how staff has outlined it, and we can talk through any other changes.
Question.
Sure.
When you say these guys deal with compliance, is it just whether or not there's a permit, or do they handle calls from neighbors about noise and too many cars parked on the street and all those other sorts of things?
Yes, they do.
They do. Okay. So they get educated about what our regulations
Right.
are.
So what would happen is they will know what our regulations are, and they will have actually a person answer the hotline, and they have to respond. They get a call on the hotline, they have to respond to that call within 90 minutes.
But that's what our code says, is that there's we require an authorized representative to be within 90 minutes of the home, right? So if there's a call out in Coolin area, someone in Priest River is the authorized representative, so they get a call and say, hey, there's some kind of violation. Let's just say parking. We have 12 cars parked on the street. It's a violation of the code. You need to go out there and fix it. So that's far better than, if we had a hotline, that's way better than what we have right now, which is, there was a party over the weekend, what are you guys going to do?
Who's the authorized representative now, if that happens?
It's based on the application. So each vacation rental permit is required to have.
They have to have an authorized representative.
Exactly.
But what would happen was one of these companies would call that person.
Right.
Or they said they would call the owner, maybe if there's something we recommend.
So the owner can be the authorized representative as well.
Right,
But oftentimes it's a property management company.
yeah, got it,
They have a local rep.
So I have two comments. The first comment would be, in order to find a solution, you have to define the problem. And I don't think this problem has been very well defined because it's been very haphazard over many years and without much monitoring or oversight. So I think there's a need, a commitment made by the commissioners, county commissioners. My second comment is, my previous experience is in government, you need to have priorities. If this is a priority to the commissioners, then they need to find a way to fund it and to get it solved. Without that, without those two commitments, the understanding of the problem fully, and without a commitment, I don't see the need to go any further with this, and I would just address it to the county commissioners themselves to say, this is where we are, why should we spend all this time and energy and effort of many individuals to construct something where we don't really fully understand the problem. We know there's a problem, but we don't know the dynamics of the problem enough to define how to solve it or help solve it or give the means to solve it. And quite frankly, this will come down to the county commissioners having to make a decision, is this a problem that's significant enough for us to make an investment of time and energy and funding to solve it? And once they decide that, then I would say you would go out, study the problem, come back to the board and draft a recommendation. Otherwise, we're just gonna turn the wheel.
Well, that's, that's certainly a point of view that I kind of agree with, but I think we need to look at some numbers here. So if there's 1,000 listings, let's assume that means that they're trying to rent those places. We're getting 30%, so that's like 300. You get 65%, that's 350 more.
Mm-hmm.
You multiply that times 280, that's $98,000.
Mm-hmm.
These companies charge anywhere from $25,000 to $40,000.
Mm-hmm.
Easily covered. Easily covered. If you do a 1-year renewal, which is, the 2-year renewal is sort of, it's not normal. I mean, most municipalities that I've talked to in Idaho, which I have, not all of them, of course, they have a 1-year renewal. So if you even have $150 for a renewal in 1 year, which I think is pretty reasonable, that's $97,000 a year.
I think your logic is well said. What I do understand from where I came from, we weren't able to create enterprise funds through taxes. So if you're having a program such as rental compliance, or whatever you want to call it, program, if you're finding that, and you're allowed to have a reasonable surplus and whatnot for cash flow purposes, you can't overcharge. And it would be refreshing, actually, if we found a solution where we could reduce the fees because we have 65 to up compliance. And again, that's a problem that needs to be addressed, but I don't believe we have enough information to do that. Now, we could simply
I think we'll
kick the can and get a few words changed and just let it go and not, I wouldn't suggest struggling with this too much because it's really not going to have much impact.
Well,
we need to, so there's one way to deal with it. I mean, this is a chicken and egg problem. Okay, so one thing we could do is we could make a recommendation to the boards, to the county commissioners, that we already have a fee, it's $280, right? So we wouldn't be changing that. That's already a fee. That's perfectly within the kind of fee that any other municipality in Idaho seems to charge. And we'll have to figure out what a renewal fee would be, but let's assume that it's $150. We could recommendation on that, and we would make a recommendation that there be a 1-year renewal, and that we contract with one or more one of these outfits. It's is meaningless to me as to which one is whatever is cost effective, and whoever has got the most effective program, and then present it to the county commissioners. The other thing that both of these companies do is they have a best management practices, and they can give you what has been working in other jurisdictions and what they would recommend in terms of occupancy, parking, that kind of stuff. I mean, they have recommendations on that. So rather than us beating up ourselves about that, I think we need to get some input from them on best management practices.
And do you understand from that that they could make a recommendation of how they would recommend based upon other communities that have been quote unquote successful, or way the commissioners would like this community to be operated? Would they not be able to draft the code language so it is in continuity with their recommendations? If we make recommendations now, I don't know what we're making recommendations based upon.
No. So what I would suggest, again, this is just my suggestions, that we would do this in stages. We might first propose an enforcement mechanism for whatever regulations we have. And if that would involve two different things, that would involve one, the initial permit, and whatever the regulations might be. Or even if they stayed the same, for right now. And we get the best. So we would get input from the county commissioners on our recommendations with regard to the enforcement part of it, and hiring one of these outfits to do that. And then if they agree with that, and part of that is again using a 1-year renewal fee for that, so that's a change. So we would recommend that. I don't know what form exactly the recommendation would take, but I think we could make a motion, whatever. And then once we get that input, if the county commissioners believe that this enforcement is the way to go, and they're willing to go along with this recommendation, then we go back and we talk about best management practices, and we deal with the regulations.
At that
But
time.
until we know what the enforcement is, I agree that why mess around with the regulations if
I'll just admit right now, I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to that.
we know
Jeff,
this, Mike.
Is it true that the fees
Well, you didn't have to be so agreeable.
are
You
set
don't have to agree with
in
it.
principle to cover the costs of your staff to process the application?
That's every land use fee that's.
Right. And is it reasonable to take a look at those fees, if need be, to incorporate the cost of one of these regulatory services, if need be? I mean, it sounds like actually from what Alan is saying, it actually might serve as a way potentially to fund it, but and I don't know, perhaps even reduce the fees. I don't know. It depends on what you do with the renewal policy, I guess, is the crux of it.
There's some things we could do to reduce.
But you could change. You could set the fee structure to both cover your staff time that you need to do to process the applications and the whole issue, the whole program, I guess you'd say, plus to cover the costs of an enforcement program to make sure that the regulations are being followed.
Compliance.
Yeah, compliance program.
So there's another kind of other aspect to this. Some of these outfits, maybe both, have a registration module. So you actually would do the registration through them.
The property owners.
Right. So that's
Takes a load off our staff.
that's automated as well, including the payment. So
Question.
the other question I had, the other issue that I raised was the initial inspection. So my experience with the county is I have a vacation rental property. It's not being rented, but I have a permit. So what happened was the county sent out an inspector to look at the parking plan that I had. I think I'm pretty sure they looked inside and see that there was bedrooms and so on. What some of these other jurisdictions have done is rather than send an inspector out, is that you submit, the applicant would submit his plan, his occupancy with regard to whatever regulation we had, and they would sign that under penalty of perjury in an affidavit. And then, it would be then really kind of a complaint enforcement, but it would reduce that cost to the county of setting this measure up. And I think Coeur d'Alene does that. I think some other jurisdictions will try to do
You could also do a hybrid of it where we do an inspection on the initial and not on the renewals, right? And then we cut the cost down on the renewals to reduce the staff time on it.
Yeah, you could do that too. I mean,
There's a.
but I think, if you have people signing under penalty of perjury, that means something to most people. Not all, but so that's another thought in terms of reducing.
What is happening today now, historically, with people that are known renters, i.e. the 1,000, but 600 of them are not getting permits? What happens to them? Well, there's your
So
problem.
it's inherently difficult to regulate short-term rentals because there's not a way for us to search by address.
Well, until you
the
get the
location.
system set up.
Right, so I can't go look on Airbnb and say, 453 whatever street, there's this is an active vacation rental, because they don't give you addresses. It's just a general area, right? Like a fuzzy box in this area.
have to rent every one of those to find the addresses.
Right, so there's not a way for us to review it, so it's been all on complaint basis. My neighbor this, so we look at the assessor photo, this blue house, okay, we look at the complaint, we look at through Eagle View and other things we have, okay, that's a blue house, this is a blue house, it looked like the same house, there's a violation. So it's some.
So if the violator, this house, has a permit, then what happens with a house that has a permit or a house that does not have a permit? Is there
Well,
any
there's
action?
there'd be two questions. What happens if you discover somebody's renting their house and they haven't pulled a permit, a short-term rental permit?
Then we
And
send
then-
them a complaint letter saying you need to do this.
Okay. And generally, what's your experience? Do they generally come in and get a permit?
Yeah.
Okay. The second question, I think what Mike's getting at is what happens if somebody calls and said, hey, this house next door to me, they've always got 10 cars parked in the street, whenever it's rented.
And that's the
and
difficulty.
maybe they do have a permit, right?
Right. So right now, the way, you can see how the code's written on the number of violations, and then when it comes down to like revoking the permit. But I have 3 compliance guys for the whole county, and they're not parking mates, right?
Yeah.
So it comes down to regulating parking that typically is based on we could look at it and I could direct them. But they've got so many other tasks on their plate that when it comes to short-term rental violation for parking, it's a low on the priority list.
But these companies, first of all, with regard to locating the properties that are being rented, they have a very, at least my understanding of what I've heard, very robust system to identify those. Like the one we talked to this morning, they have 500 different jurisdictions that they do this for. So they've got a pretty good way to identify. Don't just look at Airbnb or VRBO and try to hope there's an address there, because there won't be. They got other ways to do that, and they would produce a list, whether or not county staff send out a letter based on their information, or they send the letter out. That can happen. So that's that issue.
What I heard as a response is, well, we're pretty limited and there's not much we can do about it. So why go through all this time and energy and effort to pass something that you're really not going to be able to do anything about? So
that's not
I think
true, though.
I think I heard you make a recommendation that we send it back to commissioners and say, we're recommending that you institute a program. If this is a priority for you, somehow you figure out on our bailiwick how to fund it. And if you choose not to, then fine, we'll just leave it the way it is. But if you choose to go ahead with this, you bet we'll be responsive and we'll use their expertise to help planning draft the necessary verbiage to make their BMPs effective.
Right. But I mean, there's a lot of things we need to do with the current regulations that need to be tightened up. For instance, we have 5 complaints before anything happens. Well, that doesn't work. You need to have, 1 or 2, or maybe none, one complaint. And then, especially if it's a parking violation, stuff like that, I mean, I don't want to wait 5 complaints. And once you tighten that up, then there's also the issue of, well, what can you do to make it even more important that they comply with either the regulations or the permit? You can do a fine. We need to discuss that with our legal counsel, but they only wants to answer to the written questions. So.
Does your permit then recognize currently you're permitted for X number of people, X number of cars with X number of bedrooms?
They get a max occupancy in that building.
And is the bedroom thing addressed and the car parking addressed in the permit?
Well,
So the other two-
I assume it's in their application. They say how many in their application, how many bedrooms there are.
Okay, so if they say 20 cars, that's okay?
If you have the room to park them, sure.
Okay, so you are
Off the street.
checking to
Correct.
make sure, okay.
That's
Those
why
are
I think Jake's suggestion that we maintain at least some inspection, or at least a parking requirement, because you're supposed to give them a parking plan.
Well, no, that's not in there right now.
Oh, isn't it?
It's in, so back to defining the problem.
That was just an inspection
So
issue, because they had me point out where cars could park.
it's not like it's not baked into the code specifically where it says a parking plan is required. It just shows, I think it says something, I'd have to look it up exactly, but more or less it limits the number of occupants based on the off-street parking capability. But the way I defined it in the proposed changes was a definite parking plan. So like show, these locations show exactly where the cars are going to be parked, ensure that it's off of county property right off the right of way.
So the way it works right now with regard to occupancy, in addition to the parking thing, is if you have 3 bedrooms, our regulations right now allow 3 persons per bedroom plus 3. So my little cabin that we're using, got a permit, that's 12 people.
So
But, okay, I'm ready to move on however you like. I mean, I'm just not gonna,
So I have a little bit different perspective, I think, maybe than Mike and Alan. I'm fully supportive of making a recommendation to the commission that we do something about enforcement. And I recognize that that's probably the best way to get at this in the long run. However, I would say that I'm not sure if they decline to do that, I'm not sure we should just say, well, take it all out of here. Because I think in the same way that we see with fairly limited enforcement capability, that 30% of the 1,000 people who are doing short-term rentals have complied with the requirement to get a permit. I think there's a certain number of people who are doing short-term rentals who will take whatever requirements and regulations we put in the code seriously, and they will make their best attempt to try to run their rental accordingly. So, if we give them an occupancy limit, they'll abide by it. If we tell them you need to have, 2 parking places, or you need to have a parking place for every 3 people, or whatever requirement we come up with, they'll make their best effort to abide by it. So I think we'll get some benefit from having a reasonable set of regulations, even in the absence of a robust compliance program. And so I think it's worth doing, or just for that purpose.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I do think it's sort of an exercise that's necessarily going to be very effective. But we can certainly do that. I would like to get some information from these outfits on DMPs.
I don't disagree with that. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, because I think
Take advantage of it.
we kind of struggle with, should we go bedrooms, should we do this, should we maximize? Why are we struggling with it when we can get information as to what?
I think we're
That makes
struggling
sense. That makes
because we
sense.
really don't understand or know what's the best avenue, and
So let's get
probably do this.
So my suggestion was, let's get some information on best management practices.
Okay.
I think I'm supposed to get a call next week with a guy was recommended to us this morning. I don't know, I hope he's not charging them. Didn't say it would charge us, so, we can kind of get that, maybe in some other, maybe, I know Deckard has somebody that does that too. And then we can kind of deal with these regulations in the context of other jurisdictions' best management practices. So that's what I would suggest, and I would hope that we would be able to cash in a recommendation to the county commissioners that they could actually, act on, so that we've got some direction on the enforcement issue. So I think that's very important. I just talked to Luke briefly, and he's okay with that.
I agree. I'm just fearful of, I agree with you too, some will comply, that 30%. But if we actually, solve the problem right now, it would just go out into thin air and nothing would really be done. So which is contrary to, I think, my nature certainly. So
I know when I spoke with Deckard, they serve a number of municipalities, and I think they said that if you get to 85 to 90%, that's really good compliance rate. You're going to end up with 10 or 15% of people or landowners just aren't going to comply. That's the nature of it with compliance, right? So back to defining the problem. A month ago when I presented this, it was the idea that how we were interpreting max occupancy didn't match directly with how the code was written. There was a definable problem with a solution to it, right? We weren't at the time seeking for PhD sign off on these, so I proposed a text amendment for max occupancy that incorporated all those changes that aligned the text with how staff was using the code, right? So from there, it got blown up into a much bigger deal. So I don't know if you guys want to define a bigger problem than what I did initially. So we tried to craft some changes in response to concerns we heard from the Planning Commission over the last month. So on top of that, we met with Panhandle Health, so Jason and Catherine are here. And we've crafted some, and I have some analysis on that. I think it's good exercise to go through. We have now an appeal hearing that helps us understand better how the board sees and regulates this code. But I still think there's room for improvement on max occupancy. So if you guys don't want to do this tonight, and I'm not sure exactly what direction you guys are leaning towards, but I have a code draft change drafted.
I think what happened, Jake, was we started getting into this max occupancy thing, and I think there's a general feeling that maybe that was too much. It was inconsistent between large parcels and small parcels.
I haven't seen.
Then we got into well, what should the occupancy be, and how should it be defined?
Sure.
So I think unless there's some reason for us to address that max occupancy right now, rather than doing it when we're doing the rest of the code. Well, I would like to hear definitely from Panhandle Health about, because one of the big concerns that we've had is how do we jive the regulations with the septic issues. So I know you go on bedrooms, and so we're trying to figure out that and how max occupancy deals with that, because if you're having 3 people to a bedroom, I think that's more than you would consider, that is normal. So anyway, we'd like to hear from you.
Do you want, I'm not sure how, were you wanting to go over some of the information that you and Jason discussed?
Yeah, we
So I
don't
worked
have
with-
that.
What's that?
We don't have that on our drive, do we?
No, and I don't know because there's a lot of addresses here. Is that list you sent me a public document?
It's all public information,
Okay.
yeah, so
I want to make sure before I share.
it's fine, yeah, it's just a list of septic units.
So I have a list of failed septic systems that I got from Panhandle Health way back to 2018 to current. I got through this month, and then we cross-referenced that with the vacation rental permits that we have, and then we did an analysis that showed which of those are the same, right? Which of those have the same address. I worked with GIS to get and validate RP numbers and whatnot, so to make sure that what we're looking at is the same list. So of the vacation rental permits, we had 297. The failed septic systems, there's 219. So a similar-ish sized list. There were 5 corresponding addresses, right? Of which 4 of them had a failing septic system before a vacation rental was issued, right? So we have failed septic system, and each one of those was resolved in a matter of a few months, right, from when they got the failed septic notice from Panhandle Health. One of which was a failed septic system after we issued a vacation rental permit. So I don't think we can directly say there's a causation, relationship between issuing a vacation rental permit and having a failed septic system. When I talked to Jason and I asked, like, is this something that anyone else has analyzed throughout the state? And I don't think we have any data from around the state or even the northern 5 counties here that indicate, a causation relationship between the two.
So there was how many in Bonner County?
About 300 vacation rental permits,
Okay.
and 219 or so failed septic. Yeah,
But how many were both a vacation rental?
Only 5.
5.
Only
But
5.
again, of which only 1 had a vacation rental permit,
prior.
issued, and then the septic system failed. So is that a coincidence or is that a causation, right?
Well, but it does highlight another issue, and it may be a marginal issue because it sounds like there's only 4 of them, but it doesn't seem to me like we should be issuing vacation rental permits on a property that already has a failed septic system.
Right, but
So there ought to be some check.
each one of those, right, each one of those had been resolved before we issued the permit.
Oh, okay. I understood it was resolved. I didn't understand it was resolved before.
So
we issued the
that's why when we crafted this regulation in the very end, we added Part B and under revocation where it talks about a failing septic system as defined by PhD shall result in the suspension of the vacation rental permit. Once the landowner has obtained the approval for the repaired septic system, the suspension shall be lifted. Operating a VRP with a suspended will end up in a revocation. So rather than having more or less a check and balance at the very beginning that helps prevent problems, we don't really see a problem that we've defined, right? We have it as we'll revoke it if you're operating under a failed septic system.
So of those 200 septic failures, how many were just non-rentals, or are these all related to rentals?
5 were,
Only 5? So I don't know that we have an issue here that we can manage. I know this group is very concerned about water quality and septic systems, and especially failures, but I don't know that the two, it's almost like apples and oranges, and I don't know how we can combine the two together in our code for rentals when there's only 5 out of known. I don't know of the non-permitted ones, how many system failures have they had?
We don't know.
We don't see that's the issue here. We just don't know enough information to make an effective code. But if you want to change the words, let's go ahead and approve it, because ultimately it'll come down to the commissioners whether they want to really make this effective or not. Because whatever we do, it's not going to be effective under the current system.
I think we know a lot more now than when this code was crafted in 2018, because they didn't have data to analyze and say, is there a causation relationship? It was just a potential, right? So they added a provision in here that says, more or less, if Panhandle Health or a sewer district limited on occupancy, then we're going to follow that as occupancy. Right now, we don't see a relationship between the two, so the proposal is to remove that and add it to the revocation.
Add to what?
To the revocation.
The revocation.
So don't try and address it up front, but have a mechanism for dealing with it if a failure does occur.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot. I have a lot of questions for you guys. Right off the bat, the engineer review wants more data. How many septic systems roughly do we have in the county? I'm trying to guess, out of the 300 failures you had over the last 5 or 6 years, what percentage of septic systems in the county are failing? It's probably a small number.
That's a really good,
Tiny
good question, and it's really hard to quantify that. To give you an idea, we issue about 1,500 septic permits a year for all 5 counties, and I would say 30 to 40% of those are in Bonner County. by percentage, Bonner County does have a very large percentage of homes on septic
Yeah.
systems. So
You wanna grab that,
Open
the microphone is not a
Amplifier.
amplifier, it's just
Well, I think it's
it's
fine.
for recording.
I think it's fine if you want to sit down, like you have documents there. You don't have to stand.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Okay.
You don't have to sing either.
And do you guys, by any chance, do you track, is there a relationship between septic system failures and the age of the system?
Not specifically, we don't. There's somewhat of a correlation. It's not always, and there's so many different reasons that systems fail. And a lot of that, one of those factors could be use, obviously, if the system's overused. So we do some level of that. We started collecting a basic information on every failure, essentially in response to our legislature asking very similar questions, which is, are septic systems going to fail prematurely based on house sizes? It was a question about sizing septic systems in general. So we don't have it necessarily tracked that specifically, but if there's a premature failure, we absolutely take a look at it. But there's
So many
factors.
potential
Yeah.
attributes that could cause a failure, from driving on them to parking on them. And then what they're putting in their system. You know, they could have a home of just a few people, but do a lot of laundry or be putting down baby wipes or whatever, you know. Not that that's, but there's just so many potential causes for failure,
Yeah.
and we don't always know.
How do you
I think-
become aware of failures?
That's a good question.
It's self-reporting essentially, so it's
So
either.
there's probably a lot of failures that aren't being reported. I don't know what a lot is, but there
But
are.
yeah, more.
There
yeah,
are
I think
failures
that's
that
a-
are not being
yeah,
reported.
I would say that's a fair statement.
And
There's
you
more.
have a guesstimate, maybe.
We really don't know.
Oh,
I don't want to
okay.
I don't want to just make up numbers
That's
because
the
it's.
thing with the world of septic is it's really hard, you know, it's not like a physical structure where you could look on Google Earth
Sure.
or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But, and even neighbors, it's hard to see, but a lot of them do get reported from neighbors smelling odors or, seeing them physically. But, you know, we are a rural community, so a lot of these, we just wouldn't even be able to see them from the road or have any idea. So I don't know how we would.
But when they put in a septic system, they have to go through the health department for a permit, correct? And Bonner County doesn't allow a site to be built on, or a living site, a home to be built without that permit?
Right now, in Title 11, it requires a PHE sign off before we finalize a permit. So they
Okay.
can start construction, we'll
Okay.
initialize construction, but they can't finalize.
Well, they'll still finish their home. They'll just have a piece of paper that says not approved. So if it's because there's not a certificate of occupancy, correct?
Yeah, so we issue a certificate in lieu of occupancy. That more or less states we don't have building regulations, we didn't check the foundation, that kind of
So
stuff.
you don't do a perk test or anything like that prior to construction?
We used to when we signed BLPs in the old way. We would review a site before a structure was granted a BLP to construct it. Now what's happening is we show up after the fact in a lot of cases unless they voluntarily contact us on the front end.
Okay, I'm glad I don't have your check.
So in general, just real quick on that. So the general process is that we provide information to the property owner who's ultimately responsible for the project. And then on the back end of that, if they don't follow through, if they don't comply with those, then they don't get approval. So it takes the responsibility, puts it squarely on the property owner up front, but it's not a requirement to have a site evaluation.
And the
done
county
through-
doesn't really stop anyone from building if they haven't got compliance.
No, we don't enforce like PhD's rules, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah,
But the county did at one time have a requirement that there be a PhD sign off before building permit.
Right, so we had one end of, so we're talking Title 11, so not land use regulation at all, right, just to make sure we're clear. So we had and this doesn't involve vacation rentals at all as well. So we had a sign off for BLPs required before we issue and allow people to start construction. That was removed and went the other way. the pendulum swung really far, right? So we had no requirements at all, nothing, no regulation, a complete disconnect between county building regulations and Panhandle Health. So last year we swung back to the middle where we have like a front end sign off, or not a sign off, but a front end like review from Panhandle Health saying, okay, this is where you're at. And then we have a back end sign off before we finalize the permit. So we're kind of in the middle of the two extremes. Right?
What was the reason for going one way or the other?
Political changes?
The vote. Well,
So
the vote, didn't it also,
building location permits were, when PSG was signing off on the permits, at least that's what I know. I don't claim to the accuracy of the information. But it was taking a lot of time for the building location permits to be final because the PSG, I suppose, didn't have the staff at that time to be able to keep up with the number of building location permits. And so people were still building the buildings without the building location permits. There was a lot of faults on the planning side. As in the compliance was really difficult for us because people were still building without getting a building location permit, and they were neither following the planning rules nor were they following the PhD rules in that case. So that's why it was changed that we stopped requiring PhD sign-offs, and so people were at least getting the building location permits even if they were not getting the PhD sign-off. So we came back to the middle for PhD to be able to review the permits before the BLPs were finalized.
What does that review involve?
Well, that's the
At this
thing, I
time.
mean, we're only doing a paperwork review, so what my staff are often telling people is we don't have a septic permit on file, and that might be all that we're telling them. And then if they get their BLP and they construct their dwelling and there's no suitable spot for septic, then we will know that at the end when they come in to have us do a site evaluation. Realistically, because our staff up here in this area are very nuanced on the statewide technical guidance, we have staff that really do our best to try to find any compliant solution for a new permit, but any new permit does have to meet all current standards. So if we're able to find a complex system for them, then that's what we'll permit. And so the landowner may end up spending more money than they would have if they had come to us first. Periodically, we show up and it's just they've destroyed the site and we don't have a suitable spot left for septic. So then we're in positions of looking for easements on neighboring parcels, or as a last resort, a whole house incinerator system that doesn't discharge sewage to the ground. But, for the most part, it's complicated or complex engineered systems or some type of easement that ends up kind of happening on the difficult sites. But
or compliance?
So you
or compliance issues,
so in that initial review before the BLP is finalized, you aren't going out and looking at a site plan or doing perk testing or identifying possible locations for drain fields? None
It's
of that.
possible, because it depends if, take, for example, if it's voluntary, right? It's on the applicant to initiate. So before I start construction, it behooves me as the landowner to say, I wonder where the best spot is for septic. I'll contact PhD. So it's not like it's.
They'll do that if the
never-
owner asks, but it's
Yeah.
not a requirement.
Again, this isn't, so this board makes recommendations on Title 12 LUPA-based decisions. This is
Understood.
building regulations.
It's out of our bailiwick.
And we can discuss it, but I would frame it around our topic of discussion tonight, which is vacation rental permits.
So I think the fundamental concern that we've been wrestling with over the last two meetings, at least from my perspective, is I think there's a concern that the occupancy is, I believe when the Idaho wrote those code about septic capacities, somebody in their mind was using bedrooms as a proxy for occupancy.
Yeah.
And they came up with the wastewater flow requirements based on the number of bedrooms, but they had in their mind somewhere how many people they thought were going to be living in that house typically. And I think what we're wrestling with is, we have it plain text in front of us. The current regulation is 3 per bedroom plus 3. And I believe that's not at all typical of a single family residence. I would bet quite a bit of money that that's not the numbers that those people had in mind when they came up with the Idaho regulations about wastewater flow requirements based on the number of bedrooms. So we're wrestling with, are we creating a situation where septic systems are going to be overused because they weren't built to handle the occupancy? And, I've thought about a lot of things. Do people on vacation do as much laundry as they do when they're home? And I know laundry is a big component of that average weight. I don't know how to deal with all of that.
Right.
Plus the fact that the vacation rentals, maybe a weekend rental, and maybe a full week
Yeah.
rental.
It may be, there may be a dozen people there when it's rented, but it may be only rented half the time or a third of the time. Who knows? Or at least it may only be rented at that capacity for 1 week a month. And maybe it's rented the other 3 weeks, but the other 3 weeks it's not anywhere near that occupancy rate. So one of the questions that it comes to is the failure mode that I think we're concerned with is what happens when you overuse the system. So what's the resolution to that? Yes, it's a failed system. Is the only resolution time? Give the system time to let that excess wastewater perk away? Or do you go to an alternate drain? Do you say you have to go to an alternate drain field or make a bigger drain field? Or what's your solution to that particular failure mechanism?
Yeah, the repair process is very basic, and it's the same regardless of what caused the failure, essentially. And so they would need to apply for a repair permit. We would do a site evaluation with test holes, and we'd be doing a new drain field in most cases. If they've done something where they've just parked all over their tank or somehow damaged the tank, they might just replace the tank if that's what comes to light.
Those
But
kind of failures are
the
going to
drain
occur, I think. But,
Yeah.
And it's different. An actual mechanical failure of the system to me is a different category, I think.
Well,
If it came down to some kind of compromise from excessive wastewater flows and that, but again, we're not really getting into the nitty gritty when we show up to fix one. Unless we're having conversations and something comes to light and it's like, oh yeah, I've got all these flows, then we'd have conversations. But in general, you wouldn't just rest it, really, if they're going to continue. Normally they need their system, so normally we're in a process of trying to get them a fix right away so they can use their house.
Okay.
And they would be putting in a new drain field.
What is though the assumption, if you've got a 3-bedroom house, I think it was 240 gallons or something like that. So there must be an assumed occupancy for those 3 bedrooms.
Just circle around this, yeah.
Yeah, so the rules don't specify, and this is a really challenging topic for that reason, because they're essentially still single-family residences, so it's still a dwelling. Most of the time, we don't regulate occupancy within dwellings, right? From discussions at the state level, we've been having this kind of statewide, and this health district 4 in the Boise area they have a short-term rental ordinance together with Valley County, and what the reasoning that they use is essentially assume 2 people, double occupancy per bedroom, and they're just using the logic that within the rules we basically add 50 gallons per day per bedroom. So just an assumption that each bedroom then equates to 25 gallons per day. Per bed. So there's really no part of the problem is it doesn't specify. I mean, that's one of the problems that we have with the rules in general. They're very archaic. They haven't really changed much since the 1970s when they were adopted. But that's how in Valley County, that's how their ordinance is worded. It's basically tied to the number of occupants and then has some tie to that flow basis. I don't know if there's a perfect way to do it, but then again, part of the struggle that we're going to have is the state of Idaho, or the health districts have a bedroom definition, a specific bedroom definition, and I don't know that Bonner County does either. Just with the way the planning department is structured, so that creates challenges because even just reading the Valley County ordinance, it has some language, basically asking the health district to define a bedroom, and that's something that we don't have a bedroom definition. That's not anything that we're going to just go through houses and try to, to to try to dictate the
The
same.
assumption discussion too.
Assumption is, I guess, 2 per bedroom, no?
Is my,
That's how they interpreted it.
yeah, and it is just an assumption. I mean, even when we discussed it at the state with the Department of Environmental Quality and the guidance committee, which is the committee that essentially writes the guidance manual for the state, it's essentially that we're just assuming that that was the basis for that use.
Mr. Chairman, I think we could go on here and talk ad nauseum about septic systems and how they work and how they don't work. I don't know that that's germane to the issue that planning department brought to this board, which was basically to amend the code to determine occupancy. I think septic systems and septic failures, it sounds like to me Bonner County has a lot of issues which are being accentuated by the growth it's experiencing. But neither here nor there, I don't know that we need to really go on further about in detail septic systems, because I don't think it relates well to the code. I would just suggest let's come up with some words here that minimize the amount of, or what would be perceived to be an appropriate number of renter people in a unit. Use bedrooms, use whatever you want. Use I don't know, square footage, whatever you want, and also parking. And let's just amend it and then make the strong recommendation with it that the county commissioners need to address this problem, and that this changed language is not going to solve anything.
Well, we have the mental health here, so we might as well.
Well, I appreciate that, but it sounds like to me I'm glad I don't have your job.
Do you guys, is 25 gallons a day per person a reasonable estimate of wastewater flow?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, if you look at the national average, if you factor in laundry, everything else, it's, you read around 50 gallons per day. It used to be 75, with the low flow fixtures, that number's come down, but it just varies so much. That's part of the challenge with it. But obviously, just like you said, there is clearly there's a link between people and wastewater flow.
Right. There is, and it's also a hard one because the known data is pretty much urban systems.
Mm-hmm.
So, with a treatment plant, how many inflow, outflow, so all that stuff. But the studies that I've read over the years that compare rural situations or septic systems versus sewer, people in the sewer system, they have a tendency to use a lot more. It's overused compared to rural. Maybe that's just because people in the rural area know they can't overtax their system, so they don't. It's hard to judge because we got lots of urban people moving to rural.
Well, that's what I was
all the septic system is.
Yeah, I know. We definitely experienced that. And one other thing, not that it might have some bearing on this conversation, but just so every state has a different basis for wastewater flow for septic system sizing. Most states use bedrooms, and Idaho is the lowest state of 50 states in terms of the estimated wastewater flow per bedroom. So 250 gallons per day is the estimated flow in Idaho. In Washington, that would be something more like 360. And most other states kind of follow that same guideline of 120 gallons per day per bedroom. That it is what it is, but just that is a factor with septic systems.
That's a state.
Statewide, yes.
And one thing to keep in mind with all of this is, a lot of times, especially maybe a small lakefront lot, we will honor the permits or the vested right that they have been granted, and we'll repair it as best we can. But it might be a non-conforming repair, so it might be too close to surface water. It might not be sized quite large enough, or whatever. It might be maybe too close to the house, but just keep that in mind that we will do a repair when they have a valid right to discharge, but it may not meet all current standards. So those systems, just from my perspective personally, I wouldn't want to see an increase in wastewater flows going to a system like that. But it would be hard for, I just keep that in mind. A repair is a repair. Most of the time they're conforming, sometimes they're not. But that's why I like the idea of having the option for a potential revocation if something comes to light like that, you know.
Yeah,
You guys give any, when a property owner gets a permit, do you give them any information about best practices for living in a home with a septic system? I'm particularly thinking about people who maybe have never done that before.
We have tons of conversations and education. I would say education is one of our strong suits, really. But people don't always.
Because I'm kind of riffing off of something we heard a couple weeks ago. I forget if it was, maybe it was DEQ or IDWR talked about the voluntary education program they implemented in Boundary County about shoreline development and how to maintain water quality. And he thought it was pretty successful. I'm wondering if that can be part of what we do here, even along with give them an information packet when they get their short-term rental permit. Because I still do think, I think in the end, we're probably going to go towards the only way for us to really effectively deal with this is once a problem materializes, to get it repaired and revoke the permit while it's being repaired. But maybe some education up front could help head off some of those things. I have also thought about whether if there is a failure and it does appear that it's due to overuse, maybe part of getting the permit reissued is to change the occupancy rate.
Well, I think we need to reduce it initially. If there's sort of an assumption that it's 2 per bedroom, then we should have it more.
So I'll be clear, from the research I've done, and I'm not an expert, you guys are the experts, but I came up with 50 gallons per day per person. So I think the Idaho occupancy assumptions are based on 1 per bedroom plus 1. So a 3-bedroom home, they assume mom and dad are in 1 bedroom and 2 kids in each of the other bedrooms. One per bedroom plus 1. And that pretty much tracks the wastewater flows if you assume 50 gallons per person per day. So there are some places where it breaks down, but that was my best estimate of what somebody was thinking about occupancy when they wrote those requirements. So I think even at 2, and I think, by the way, 1 per bedroom plus 1, if I was a short-term rental property owner, I would balk at that. Because I know most of these homes, if they have good-sized bedrooms at least, they're putting sleeping accommodations for 2 people at least in every bedroom. And not at all uncommon to find at least 1 bedroom in the house somewhere that's stacked full of bunk beds. So I know that's the way they're set up. And I understand that. That's the purpose. And that facilitates the kind of rentals that people want to rent. People want to get their families together and friends and so forth. And a lot of times those are big groups.
But I think we've got.
So to me, it's a dilemma. I'm not really sure.
We have those considerations. But that's why I would highly encourage and recommend that before we finalize any of these regulations, we get best management practices.
Sure, I don't disagree with that.
You get what?
That's
Okay.
from those who have dealt with
Right.
that, those 2
Right.
companies or more.
That's what I thought he
And we'll
said.
take into consideration what we think the septic issue might be. I mean, parts of the county obviously don't have that problem because we've been sewers.
And that ought to be, by the way, that might be something we address in the requirements. If you're dealing with a property that is on a sewer system, and I don't know, you probably can have somebody educate me about how those work. Do they get an allowed amount of wastewater that they
I
can
don't think
storage, or is
I
it
don't
just
know if
whatever
any of them are.
whatever comes out of your house is okay?
I don't think any of them have a
Flow rate.
flow meter.
Well, they
They don't.
Yeah, we have lots of community systems that are limited definitely not. We have lots of LSASs
So that was,
Mini system or a sewer?
Well, large
some people call,
absorption areas,
Large absorption.
they've got a system in place, but it's based on use. So the one question I've been waiting to ask,
Wait a second, Dan. So do you have flow meters?
we wish everyone had, I've been thinking that this whole time, they just
Every
put them-
structure everywhere, yeah.
They just have set bedroom counts and just like we do for subsurface community sewer systems. Some of our sewer districts, they have specific flows. So it is all.
nobody meters.
They're required to now, and some of the good, well-managed systems, they do meter the use, and And in some cases, they're actually able to use that data to allow more connections to their system because they can demonstrate the lower flow. That's what makes it so hard, is it's so
I think what they're
variable.
doing, the system itself has a meter, how much comes out of the well and goes to the distribution system, so they know that. And then they might have a meter on the other end. what goes
Exactly.
to the septic.
Yep.
It's not an individual house.
You're right,
Yeah.
system-wide.
So I've been waiting to ask this question. So when it became known that by Panhandle that vacation rentals are out there, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
What concerns did it raise with the crew? You know, what were the discussions, and have those fears that came out, have they materialized?
I'd say, first of all, we always have concerns with any system being overloaded. And being, within Panhandle Health District, the 5 northern counties, we have a lot of, tourist areas, a lot of areas that is a concern, and that's a concern whatever the use is. So, for example, Dwayne Hagedon, the Hagedon House on Coeur d'Alene Lake, 21,000 square feet. They literally will bus people over in the cruise boats, 100 people at a time. That's a 2-bedroom house. So that's very different than
Yeah.
small
It's like
little.
he's not in Bonner County.
Yeah, double wide trailer in
nailed it.
Benoit County, where the drain field could be bigger than the house, right? So that's part of the challenge. Is it's very variable. I really like Jake's approach of trying to quantify that, or at least try to look to see if there's specific correlation with that. So obviously we have concerns with that, just like we do, with a house that's going to be called a 2-bedroom house and is it's 20,000 square feet, something like that. So that's always a concern. Part of our problem, though, is we're not always going to know. We go out and respond to a failed system. I know I've worked on a couple that are Airbnbs just because the contractors have told me that, whoever I'm working with, but we don't always have that information because they're still classified as residences. It's a single family residence with X number of bedrooms. We'll have conversations, like Catherine said, about the use and, trying to look for reasons that the system may fail. But ultimately, that's how we size that repair permit, unless there's any other reason to, on the part of the applicant.
This is all good information, but I would like to say that we go and address the planning department's request to amend this code with the recommendation that the commissioners, or however you want to caveat it. But we're not going to solve the septic dilemmas with this code that we're trying to adjust. And I do agree with Dave to say that, let's just make it 2 per bedroom, period. And you have an allotment of X number of cars and per bedroom or whatever. We're going to use bedrooms, whatever, per person. You get 1 car for every 2 people or something like that.
Well, it depends on the parking spaces.
And whichever is least, you are permitted to have. So if you have 5 bedrooms, that's 10 people, but you only have 3 parking spots, you're only going to have 6 people.
So, coming back to where I kind of was going this with Dell is what I would like to see us do and get everybody's reaction to it is craft a motion that will recommend an enforcement mechanism.
This is a workshop, not an action.
No, I know that.
Okay, I'm just making sure. we're
To the eventual
Yeah,
motion.
so let me finish.
Sorry.
Now we craft a motion that deals with the enforcement issue and the issues surrounding that, which would be the 1-year renewal and that kind of stuff. At least get the commissioners to chime in on that. What I would suggest is that we have the planning staff draft that type of motion, and I'll help you with it. Give my input. Without, I don't think we have to necessarily. I think we know what the outside cost might be, and we can just use that rather than that specific company. And then get their buy-in on that, and then we'll come back. At that time, we will have the best management practices discussions. And we can delve into the nuts and bolts of the regulation. We'll have some input on whether or not there's going to be an enforcement mechanism.
if you were to do that, how do you present it then to the commissioners?
But we have a motion that we recommend these
The
things.
recommendation from us, right?
Okay. Well, then I concur with what you're
That's a
saying.
good approach.
And if staff would make the language to your satisfaction, then we can prove it. And then would we take no further action until that recommendation is?
That would be my suggestion.
Yeah,
Not that we're not going
concur
to,
100%.
but that we want to have their input.
Right.
What do you think, Jay?
We can add it as an action item to draft a letter of recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to consider whatever it is you want them to consider. Not a code change, but a process change, right? And then,
Well, it would lead to a code change.
yeah, which would then lead to a code change.
And I'd like to also say that once we get past, or when that recommendation has been drafted and approved and forwarded, that the chair you make yourself available to the commissioners to explain the process by which we went through, so we don't have the staff trying to.
Fine, I can present. I was gonna say, I'd present it then at a Tuesday morning business meeting to discuss.
Good.
And then I can add it as an action item if they want to then direct
I
staff.
could show up. I don't know that I need to say anything, but it's a legislative action, right? So
I just didn't
we
necessarily
can have conversations with
be
the
in the chamber.
Yes, I'm in total agreement with you. I was wondering if I had one separate question, since we have PhD here, but it doesn't really relate to this, so I don't know if that's all right to ask a question. But I don't know. You know, Bonner County, and this has always been kind of a topic of discussion, is our urban services definition. I'll just real quick. Public or publicly maintained water supply distribution system, sewage collection, treatment, disposal, not to include individual septic tanks, drain fields, or community septic tanks, drain fields, unless subject to an approved sewer management agreement. Years ago, when we were selling parcels out on Durr Island up Clark Fork, a gentleman came in and introduced what they refer to as the whitewater system. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
Is that a system that requires a sewer management agreement?
I wanted to bring this up, I heard you mention that in the past. What
Because-
you were talking about is an operation and maintenance agreement for Whitewater, which is different than a sewer management agreement. What happens with Whitewater or any what's called an ETPS unit type of system is they need someone who's capable of doing the operation maintenance to do that maintenance. So all of those systems on Durr that had Whitewaters needed an operation maintenance agreement with a company to do that work, which is different than what you're
Because
needing.
because I don't want to assume our definition means an LSAS with DEQ approval, because if it's not over 2,500 gallons, we don't need DEQ involved, is that correct? Kind of.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, for approval, I mean, they would be involved with the review of collection lines and
Right, so
and
is there
forth.
a system out there, other than a DEQ LSAS, that has a sewer management agreement? Because we don't specify who that sewer management agreement has to be with.
So historically, sewage management agreements have been used with entities. So we have a sewage management agreement with Dalton Gardens, for instance. So we have a 5-acre rule in Kootenai County. Dalton has been zoned 1 acre historically, so it's a sewage management agreement between the health district and the city of Dalton and how we're going to manage that. We also have a sewage management agreement with Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation for Farragut State Park and some of the other state parks. So it's very specific. We've also did one with, Hayburn State Park in relation to the float homes, because basically they didn't meet current standards. We put it under a sewage management agreement, which then allowed them to pursue funding for sewer, which they ultimately obtained, and then now they could keep their float homes and work through it. So it's usually more if there's a situation that's not fully compliant, and we're just to allow, to allow, some operation between the two
Gotcha.
entities.
Because, our definition here that we've adopted, it doesn't say that who that sewer management agreement has to be with. It doesn't mention PhD, it doesn't
I've
mention
wondered that, so yeah. I didn't
DEQ.
understand.
Is, so if you have a sewer management agreement with some of these proprietary systems out there, that seems like, I don't know how often they come up and how many have been approved in Idaho. I don't know what systems would fit our definition.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's interesting language, really. Yeah, because that, just like Catherine was saying, with the mechanical individual package treatment units, we have individual service contracts, but typically the sewage management agreement is on a larger scale with, you know, the ones that are in place are between Panhandle Health District and either a city, some other type of entity, and just managing the wastewater disposal within that entity. I can try to do some research and see. They seem to be really popular in the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of historical sewage management agreements when there wasn't, as sewer was expanding and so forth.
Okay, so we're going to work on a motion to recommend an enforcement mechanism, or mechanisms, and we'll bring that back to the commission, and then we'll discuss that, and see where we go.
And so we're going to table the code amendment?
I would think so, yeah, we need to get the natural resources.
Because what it comes down to is we can amend it, but nothing will happen.
Right, that's the point.
It'll change the way we're currently regulating short-term rentals.
Sure. Which
I would
is,
say nothing's gonna happen.
well,
It's
okay.
gonna limit occupancy.
Something-
There's a lot that would change. Our operation changes.
okay, yeah, nothing is an absolute, so something will happen.
It will, and we'll get to those. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that if we don't get, the buy-in on enforcement mechanisms from the county commissioners, that we're not gonna do anything with the regulations. I think we will, but I think we need to have that.
We'll put something in the X's.
All right? So, thank you very much for, Animal Health for having very valuable information, appreciate it. We're going to now move to the comprehensive plan, natural resources. Jennifer, you've been sitting there for a long time. Do you want to have something to say? No? Okay.
No, I came for the Army Corps of Engineers presentation.
That's
So did we. This has been fascinating. Thanks.
Well, yeah, it's always good to.
We were hoping that we would have the Army Corps here so we could discuss the second opinion with them and see what their reaction was, but
They haven't formed one yet.
the last meeting, at Jake's suggestion, we were all requested to read that opinion, and certainly have,
Slacker.
So, I have my ideas about it, but I think it's evaluating this group, but that's how it's going.
Okay, thanks for asking.
Pardon me?
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
So which document?
All right, so we're going to go to the next. So we last time designated chapters 1, 4, 5, and 7 that we would try to tackle today or tonight. And so let's go to chapter 1.
Are you on the?
What are we looking at? Are we
which
looking
version?
at the proposed or the?
Is there
Which
a
version?
It's okay. So this is the deal. There's a version 5.
Oh, it's version 6.
I don't. I see version 4 and then version 6.
No, there is a folder for version 5 that has different
There's a
drafts
5?
from different commissioners,
Three
yes.
different drafts. So which version do you recommend?
Oh, I see 5.
collectively
Oh, okay,
working
sorry.
with?
There is no collective version yet, because you all worked on different drafts and you sent it to me, so I put it in a folder.
So, if you're gonna be pulling something up, which one are you gonna be pulling?
I'll pull up the latest draft that we have, the overall compiled draft that doesn't have a lot of changes, that would be version 6.
Okay.
That says 620.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be looking at my draft.
You can do that.
Then you're gonna be alone, Alan.
I'll have this pulled up and then you can pull yours up.
You can pull two up at a time.
Yeah, actually, yeah, she
Two
has
different
version
windows.
6, so that'd be fine. Pull it on the big screen.
Well, let's do this. Why don't we discuss the James suggested surface water outline? Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, and where is that?
I didn't hear what you said, Alan.
There's a proposed surface water outline.
Yeah, that's under version 5.
But below version 5.
Yeah.
It's in the folder that's called
Draft, which is
proposed.
Commissioner Drinking Water.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a general comment, my feeling is there's so many changes that we're gonna end up wanting to make to this that I'm not sure it makes sense to be going page by page, line by line through any of these drafts. We need to start at a higher level and then go do some redrafting offline and then come back and review those. That's my opinion, but, which is why before the last meeting, I went ahead and, since I had spent a lot of time going through the surface water section of whatever the latest proposal was, I had some thoughts about how to organize that at a top level.
I guess collectively here, this board needs to be looking at one document that we can use as a reference point or a starting point. There appears to be 3 or 4 documents, my original draft, which was 6 months ago, and now there's 2 or 3 other drafts that are out there. So the first section, or if we're starting with chapter 1, water bodies, are there drafts that you can show us?
Just to be clear, I didn't do a draft. I mostly went through your draft and made comments.
Yeah, and I'm wondering why that isn't
I
on.
didn't rewrite it.
Yeah,
I
okay,
just made
that's
comments.
great.
Yeah.
And why is that not on version 6 then? Your comments.
Version 6 is something that we work on today. Version 5 is still everything that has been done till before this meeting.
Okay, so we don't have it.
So what there's, Don has a version that he went through, because I think we all were supposed to try to go through this.
Do you all see a version 5 folder in your proposed
Right.
folder? That's where you have the
So
draft.
Don did his, and he probably has a more of a narrative.
Just don't say it.
Yeah, it's more just talking about the format of it, what it should be.
And then Don did his analysis, his suggestions. And what
Okay.
I did was a little different, and that is that I tried to go through these chapters, the input that we have had already.
at now?
And I thought
I'm
that
not
there
sure.
was a lot of, a tremendous amount of this component that just need to be there.
Correct.
So that's what I did, but I have to get some structure to this.
Well, I think we talked last time about the listing, the basis of it is listing out the resources and then talking about the uses of those resources as the code requires. So that eliminates 80% of what was in the previous document.
But I agree.
So it's just, so then the first exercise then is the resources that were listed in the old 2 document, is that a valid list? Or does it need to be cut down or added to? I think it needs to be cut down, so, but we need to collectively, as a group, do that.
I don't think there's any way that we can avoid looking at this kind of, at least paragraph by paragraph.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna take that much time. For instance, let's get into.
And soon it'll be Christmas.
Group writing exercises are very, very efficient.
There's so much.
Well, I didn't change the writing, I just deleted.
Assign somebody to go write it.
I just deleted, so, let's go into the water bodies.
All you
This table
volunteer
out.
to do like part of it.
Where are we?
So if you look under, so it's chapter 1, water bodies, first section, section 1.1, rivers and streams.
It's only
And the first one is part 4. Just to give you an idea of how I went through this. I left the location and order ranking, blah, 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 and the size. I took out quality, I took out pollutants, I took out clarity, took out temperature. I left quantity, assuming that was accurate. No, wait a minute. I can't tell. I know, I limited that. And history and geology, I took that out because I didn't see how it related to land use.
Maybe you ought to just tell us what you left in.
Not much. I think I left in
I
the,
saw it.
I mean, which, I think you're exactly right. I just want to know, to be clear here, so we can just go to those sections.
okay, so
Are we looking at what you did?
So are we looking at?
I'm looking at what I did.
Okay.
So what's the first section you left in?
Well, I mean, there's parts of these sections I left in there.
Section 1.1, what did you leave in or take out?
Okay, so I took out, I just went through that. So I went through,
Since we're talking about Allen's, should we pull
I
Allen's
took out,
up on the
well, you can look
screen?
at any of them. I'm just telling you what I deleted the poly, I deleted the pollutants, the clarity, I deleted minerals because there's nothing there. Temperature.
Did you delete
I
quantity?
think I eliminated quantity because the information that was there was dated. Drought. Under history and geology, I took out the first paragraph, the second paragraph. Looks like I left in some of that, I don't know why I did that. During the ice load, I don't know, I left that.
I took it all out.
You did, okay. You can do
Took
that.
out
So watersheds in the Cabinet Mountains, like that, starting there, I took that out. Rest of that paragraph. Then under Clark Fork Basin tributaries, I thought we should just list the tributaries, not necessarily all this dated information like flows and stuff, because it's dated, changes all the time. I think we need to have that in there. I did pretty much the same thing on Pond River. I left the first two paragraphs. Took out order of ranking. I didn't see how that related to land use. I left size. Took out quality, pollutants. That whole section down to clarity. I took clarity out. I took temperature out. I took high water and low water. Well, on high water and low water, I mean, if you look at it,
No,
varies by year.
I agree. Could we have staff go through, starting at the beginning where you said you deleted, and then just have us all see it up here? So what was the first one you deleted? I mean, because you're going through there so fast. I
I'm right
wasn't-
here, I'm right here.
Well, why don't you pull up, go to version 5, pull mine up. That's what I'm going.
Oh, okay.
I'm right
That's what I'm going through.
Put it on your computer.
I actually have both of them here. So what page? If you hover on that, this is version. 13.
Do you guys think you'll have any questions for Caitlin Help? Sorry to interrupt.
No, not.
About 5 minutes after you leave.
Of course.
When we get to sewage disposal,
So
we'll call you back.
are you able to
let's
find
get
that
back into the
version 5?
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was informative.
All right, has everybody got that?
From Thundering River or Thundering River?
You said,
Are we looking at Allen's on this screen now?
yes.
Okay, good.
Conway
Easier for
Basin
me to see it
tributary.
here, but.
Okay, good.
And so I think he's on page 13.
No, you're on, he's on page 4 or something, I think now.
I'm on page 13. Well, let me go back through it again.
Yes, start at the beginning. So Swati can,
Well, you can see it because the deletions are there, but it's highlighted. Well,
It's kind of a-
it's kind of fade.
It's kind of a faded pink.
Okay, that's where I can't see it.
So if you look at, again, 1.1, go down, this is the Clark Fork River. I took out quality, I took out pollutants, I took out clarity, I took out minerals, temperature. I took out quantity, drought, history and geology, except for left in there during the Pleistocene epoch. I don't know why I did that, but I guess I thought it was funny. And the rest of that paragraph, starting with watersheds, I took out glaciers. And left the generally, the paragraph starts generally streams on the north and east tend to be more productive. I'll sediment. I'll put that in there. That was interesting information. Clark Fork Basin tributary systems. What I suggested here was rather than all this information. Well, first of all these tributaries are not even in Idaho, they're in Montana. But just to, it's important if you could just list the tributaries of the Clark Fork River. Under Conneray River, I took out order of ranking, I took out quality pollutants, took out clarity, temperature, high water, low water, again, because we're dealing with land use decisions. Monterey Basin tributary streams, same deal. I would just list them. Yeah, because they're all different. I mean, they can change. Yeah, all these CFS ratings they vary by year. So I'm using them in there. The Pack River, I took out quantity, pollutants.
Basically the same list.
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Point source discharges, I've got non-point source discharges.
Mr. Chairman, I know this is a closed session that I'm discussing.
That's how.
It seems to me that in this section, considering land use and the uses of our water resources, it's really important to acknowledge that these are drinking water sources, that they're recreation resources that are used for recreation, and then also continuing to include that they are also used as the receiving waters for our waste discharge. Things like that are what I see as the uses of our waterways.
Right, and I think we're going to get to uses.
Oh, okay.
But actually, uses aren't even in the old version.
Then I encourage that, yeah.
Which is really what the charge of
Yeah,
the
that's
charter
what-
is
that's what-
the uses
by the
of
way,
them.
That's what it requires.
Just right to your
But
point.
what the code requires is not here. So all this other stuff is really kind of just.
And I think Dave's version has the uses.
I think if you wrote it out, you'd see that that's most of the text is about the uses.
Right.
I mean, I would second a lot of what Alan's saying here. There's a lot of data here that we're never going to use. It's maybe interesting information in some contexts, but yeah, I would get to a very concise tabular sort of, as much as we could, just tables that identify the water resources that we have, some key characteristics maybe, but most of the text would be about the uses.
Right, so, I mean, what's your suggestion then?
Well, in general, I agree with the deletions you're making. I mean, I approached it a little differently, and I had an organizational structure I thought might make sense to, at the top level, deal with it based on watersheds, then identify the water resources that are in each watershed. I'm not sure what they all are. I know two of them are Clark Fork Monterey, and the other one I think is Priest River.
Casper River has nothing to do with Clark Fork.
I think it's part of the Clark Fork Monterey watershed.
It's not part of the Clark Fork River.
It's part of the Clark Fork Monterey watershed. If you look at how
I think
IDWR
this
defines the
actually is
watershed.
kind of somewhat organized that way.
It is.
It doesn't describe it as this watershed or that watershed, but that's really what it is.
That's the way DEQ looks at it.
Yeah. What I'm less sure about is the southwest Bonner County. I don't know how the watersheds are defined down there, or if there even are distinct watersheds. I assume Coquilala is part of Clark Fork Monterey because it flows into Ponderay
Yeah, well, I don't know.
through Round Lake. And then,
That's right.
yeah, I'd have to.
There's some, but
I had to do some research to
Mostly
understand how the watersheds are defined down there in southwest Bonner. But
So, I don't know if it's worthwhile for me to go through that. I mean, you can see what's deleted, I think.
Right.
Hopefully. And that's kind of the system that I use there. I think what they said here, they think, like, for instance, Priest River, and the Priest Lake Basin tributary streams, I think is really what they're describing as a watershed. So,
They are, yep.
so I mean, it's just a different terminology, but it's the same thing. So, you know, I took a lot of stuff out here again that's just dated, and we won't. I mean, we got Priest Lake flows in 1994. Well, how's that relate to anything? So that's what I did, and got the lakes, and there might be some disagreement on this. I took obviously the size and depth of Pend Oreille. I took out recreation, power supplies, flood control fisheries. Maybe that's uses. I don't know, but
I think it is.
yeah. So maybe leave that paragraph in.
But, so one of the other thoughts I had, which is probably worthy of some discussion at some point, is not to deal with the uses on a water body by water body level, because my hypothesis is that the uses are pretty much universal across the board. In other words, if you look at recreation, specific types of recreation maybe vary a little bit from one body of water to another, but basically all the water bodies in Bonner County are used to some extent or another for swimming, fishing, boating. List out the recreation activities. I'm sorry?
Lakes.
Yeah, well, even the streams.
Yeah,
Boating. I float Pack River every year in my kayak.
yeah.
People fish there, people swim there, go hang out around the bridge at Colburn on a hot summer weekend. You know,
I guess I didn't consider the floating. I think that's
boating, swimming.
Floating.
But it's a recreational.
It's recreating.
So I was thinking we could address the uses sort of globally, unless there were some uses that are very, very specific to very specific water resources, which one of them might be hydroelectric power, because I think that's maybe something we should at least mention. And that's,
Definitely.
that's
So
only
this
Clark Fork,
paragraph,
Pend Oreille.
it's like I started to delete most of it. We should probably let that in there. It says recreation, power supplies, flood control, fisheries, aesthetic beauty, water supplies, commercial ventures are all affected by. Well, I know I took it out because they're talking about the lake level. This is Pend Oreille.
It's not really,
That's a true statement.
but it's not a land use.
It's not
Not
land use.
relevant to land use, really.
But so what we need to do is we need to incorporate some of these uses into a uses section.
Yeah, and I would hope we could do that sort of generally across all, and if there were some specific uses, like I said, that are very specific to certain bodies of water, we can address those individually, say.
Yeah, water bodies are part of natural resources,
Yeah,
and they're contiguous or part of, it's not literally land use, but and in the introduction of natural resources, it says the uses of rivers, waters, forests, rain soils. I mean, so we have to incorporate these water bodies in this chapter.
I'm not saying we don't.
Okay.
It would, I don't, well, I have an idea. Identify the water resources, identify the uses, and like I said, I think they're pretty much universal across all the water bodies, and then identify the current and potential threats to those uses, which we've heard about some of them when DEQ is here. We heard about water temperature
Right.
and phosphorus, and maybe there's some others that we need to deal with, and then talk about what are land use actions that we potentially might use to address the threats to those uses.
Right, because they are.
Right. And put some boundaries around it. You know, when are we gonna have some criteria for when things get this bad, we're gonna start suggesting that we do this with land use. That's the kind of thing I'm envisioning, at least conceptually. I'm not smart enough about what all those things are yet to know what we should write. But so again, identify the water resources, talk about the uses of those resources. What are the potential threats to those resources? What do we do about it in the context of land use action? Because that's the only thing we can do. I know one of the things they said is, we got to manage the phosphorus load coming out of the Clark Fork River. Well, okay, that's a nice idea, but we're not going to do anything about that.
That's the Montana to do
Right.
that.
Well, and here's one thing, I was just reading this, and I'm still scratching my head on this. The greatest share, more than 90% of water entering the lake comes from Clark Fork River inflow. I can agree with that. As does 85% of the total loading of phosphorus, the nutrient that limits algae growth in the lake. I thought it was just opposite. I thought phosphorus. When I was when we had the person here from DEQ a month ago.
Yeah, didn't you talk about,
The phosphorus loading in Fernand Lake
Right,
is causing all the algae.
Yeah.
So I don't know where this statement came from.
Yeah.
Because it sure
Throw it
seems
out.
very odd.
in the end, we're gonna need some more technical help, I think, from DEQ and maybe IDWR to help with those details.
Yeah.
But I think it would also help our discussions with them if we came to them with some sort of well-structured questions about, these are the things we're trying to write about where we don't understand the details, educate us or help us write this or whatever we want to ask them.
So I guess the reason for having these water bodies and the information for recognizing them and how they're used, I mean, the land uses are contiguous to those water bodies, and those land uses are affecting.
In some cases, yes.
Affecting the water
Yeah.
bodies, but in turn, so that should have some bearing on land uses, especially around water bodies or streams.
Right,
So, but I do agree with where you're going, Alan, and then hearing what Dave was saying too about just then coming back and laying it back in after all these deletions, laying back in your information concerning uses in those respective areas, I think is a game plan.
Right, what I would hope is that,
I'm a little jealous though that you're deleting probably 60% and I only deleted 30%, so.
yeah, well, what I would suggest is that we just kind of briefly go through this, or maybe even detail it, but I don't care one way or the other, but at least get some input as to whether the deletions are generally in accord with what, the rest of the commission wants. And then we can actually get a clean draft that has all this stuff taken out of it. And then we can then factor in we can then put in the stuff we're supposed to put in, like beneficial uses or uses, maybe not beneficial uses, but uses. Because beneficial uses is a term of art. Our term of regulation.
And you're also making the staff very happy because when I originally went through this, I just said this information needs to be updated, but if it's deleted, they don't need to update it, so no need. You guys are.
All right, so how do you want to do that? I mean, we can keep going through it, but it's pretty much the same. I mean, I kind of deleted the same stuff in each of those.
Yeah, I think so. What I would suggest is we get a clean document. This is all it's not going to be deleted, so we have a record of it. But just for the next meeting, come back with the clean document with where your deletions and also my deletions of but much fewer are removed, and add Dave's uses. And I don't know, Don, did you also put something in, I thought?
Well, I had a
Debbie
document that mostly just talked about format. I didn't go through, I started going through, obviously, the water body section first, because that's first. And it got so frustrating, because in my mind, none of it dealt with the issue.
Right.
So what do you change? Rather than trying to wordsmith all that was there, get rid of it all and start fresh. Here's the resources that we have in the county. Thinking through the general policy is we want to protect the resources. So how do we address that through land use? The code, state code requires you to talk about the uses of the resources. Okay, do that. List the resources that we figure are those resources of importance. Then start talking about the uses. And then wrap that into the actual land use practices and say, land use affects this resource this way, or uses or affects this resource this way. And the policy, the overburden policy, is going to be protection of the resources. So
That's really,
That's pretty much
that's another,
Dave's outline.
exactly, I was just
Yeah,
gonna
with
say
different
that. I was
words.
just gonna say
It
that.
is.
So-
It doesn't really change it.
Yeah, and I think you should write the text and we'll go through it. Because you already wrote the outline and we all agree that we like that, so
I'm willing to volunteer to do that.
right on.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I nominate him to write the text. Just for chapter one.
Well, just,
Yeah, that's all I meant, by the way, just to
Yeah,
be
just
absolutely
chapter
clear.
Alan, do you like his idea of the outline? Does everyone else like
I mean,
it?
I don't have to
I
do it.
like it.
I do, but
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. I think, I made some suggestions on his outline that, but, yeah, I think that's fine. I think though we need to just get general agreement that the deletions that we.
I think we're in agreement.
I'm in general agreement with that.
I think we're all in
I think
agreement.
what we need to be thinking about is what characteristics of the water bodies are really
Yeah.
germane to the rest of the discussion.
right, you have to
Yep.
keep
Right.
in mind where
And I
we're
think
going at the
there's,
end.
there's way too much detail
Yeah.
about the water bodies
Just doesn't-
that we're never gonna use that information as we go through the rest of the discussion and talk about use
It's like a
itself.
geology textbook.
And it
Exactly.
changes from year to year, so.
A lot of it does.
I think we're all in agreement with the deletions. Now we just need a new text to start working on.
But what
And for
about
all of
the
us to sit down and write a text.
But,
All right, so let's keep moving down. So I think we've got a plan.
Dave's gonna write something for us.
So let's go to fisheries. That's chapter.
Way to go, Dave.
That's fisheries. So, actually, this relates to
what
some
page is
of
that
Dave's
on?
outline.
Well, wait a minute now, because fisheries, go back to the list, it's in 6508, fisheries is not specifically, they're in water. They have to do with bodies of water. Why
Would
are
that
we
be a
even-
use?
I would delete the fisheries section.
Yeah.
And I would include it in the water resources. It's
Talking about a use.
clearly one of the uses that I
Yeah.
have in my outline is aquatic habitat.
There you go.
And the uses include fishing as part of the recreation, and I guess we have some commercial fishing. I was
There's
told we
still
have some commercial
Some
fishing.
commercial fishing.
So that's another use. And we know from our discussions already with the EQ and IWR, there's some threats to some of those fisheries. We have some species that are already identified as being endangered. We have to probably think about those. And then talk about, again, what do we do in the land use domain that may impact the water resources, and how are we gonna manage that? So I don't think we need a separate fisheries section, and
I agree.
certainly don't
I
think we
agree.
need a biology textbook about the life cycle of all the different fish that live in Palmer County.
No, we don't.
Okay,
It's interesting
I
information
I
as
think
a
that's-
fisherman, but
I agree. I didn't take it all out because I wasn't sure what we wanted.
some of it we may move. I mean, I did
Yeah, but
suggest that we
I
have
think
some
there's
basic
a lot of detailed
information.
information about each species. I don't know that we have to do that.
I agree.
I agree. With regard to the first chapter, though, there's 1.3 is wetlands.
What page is that?
It's page 54,
53.
54, I think.
As we all know, that we've done a significant Supreme Court decision with regard to the designation of wetlands as a continuous surface connection, or whatever that means. And so I would suggest that until we get some discussion with the Army Corps, that we just kind of leave this chapter alone for right now. We may want to consider, maybe moving wetlands to a different.
I think it should be actually a chapter onto its own.
So you don't wanna include it with water bodies?
No, because I don't know.
Because right now it is, isn't it?
Well, it kind of is, but that's, the discussion is a wetland and actual, if it's decided it is waters of the US, then it is water, but it's not.
It's only what, as I understand it, the majority of the court said that it now has to be a continuous surface connection to
Adjoining,
a navigable water.
and actually adjoining, not just adjacent or neighboring. And in this part,
Well, the code, that's what's interesting. The code
Yeah.
says adjacent. The Supreme Court said adjoining.
adjoining.
So they rewrote it. Pretty funny. Anyway, that's a discussion we need to have.
They're not legislative, they're judicial.
So,
Mr. Chairman.
I know there's been some suggestion that we should maybe even move this to designate the wetlands as a special area, or at least special areas designated as something that needs to be considered and refer to the more detailed discussion in natural resources. Sure. That probably something like that.
I just wanted to implore upon this body that now that the speculation is approximately 50% of wetlands in the United States are not going to be considered waters of the United States and have any protections under the Clean Water Act, I would like to implore to you all that the onus now is upon counties and state governments to actually protect, to do what you can to protect these really valuable resources and all the benefits that they offer to humanity.
Well, I don't disagree with that. The problem I have at the moment is, even though the thought was to clarify, I don't think it clarified it at all. So until we actually understand how the Army Corps is interpreting that decision, I would be hesitant to go very far until we have that clarification. And I don't know that they're going to have a clarification for us. So
It's gonna take years. That's where the CEQ comes in, because they're supposed to give guidance on that. So through EPA, that's gonna take years to do that. And in the meantime, if that still goes, what Jennifer's saying is correct. 50% what we used to consider wetlands under core determination are now not, maybe. So the state of Idaho has to stand up and say, okay, here's what we're gonna do, like other states have done, and determine what we do with wetlands, what they are, what constitutes a wetland, and what should be done about them. But that's going to have to come from
there's even a further.
Idaho DEQ, Water Resources maybe, DEQ for sure.
But if the state government doesn't do it, boards like yourselves
Yeah,
certainly
and
can.
Right,
can
and I think that
acknowledge
we don't know that either. We don't
wetlands
know
still exist.
what the state is going to now do, right, and what we can do as a local agency. So I think it's kind of created an issue for us. I know Swati had some information about, she has some thoughts on it. I think we need to get a lot of input.
And the fact is, like so many of the things that the comprehensive plan covers and the code covers, the county is not ever going to be the expert on it. We have to rely on outside experts to advise us, to inform us, to help us. So who do we go to? Well, the state agency for those that are not federal, it's DEQ.
The state, I live in a development that has a wetland going right through it. And it had to be mitigated and it had to be addressed. And there was a expert commissioned, I guess, by the federal government. I don't know all the details. That came out and looked at the land, looked at the grasses or whatever was growing in there that made the definitive boundaries of the wetland, which had to be platted in the development. So there is something out here. I don't know if the planning department's aware of it or not. This happened to be in the city of Sandpoint.
Well, that's the problem, Mike, is that since that all occurred, the Supreme Court decision came out. So unless that wetlands.
Last year?
No,
This just
Yeah, the
changed.
Sackett decision just happened within the last month.
Last month. Yeah. So unless that wetlands is continuously, has a continuous surface connection to a navigable water, it's no longer a federally regulated.
Is a stream or a little creek that is feeding it
That's a
an
good question.
navigable water?
Well, then
If they use that rule, wetlands would disappear.
Well, that's one of the issues.
I don't
Swati's
think, I don't
going
think,
to clarify this whole thing for us.
I'll start small.
No pressure.
I don't think as Bonner County, as a local government, we have the ability to define what waters of the United States are. We'll never have that ability no matter what. It works in other states when California or Washington is very, very different from Idaho, because where the federal jurisdiction ends, the state define their own waters. California says whatever is not waters of the United States, we will define waters of the state. But in Idaho, we don't have that. So unless we have some state agency saying that these are waters of the state, we don't have the ability to protect something that doesn't exist on paper.
And see, this has always been my concern as soon as this report came out and I read it for the fifth time. And my concern is this, so if Bonner County was, right currently, well, 2 months ago, if something was on an NWI mapper, a wetlands mapper, the county would say, you need it up before you can build in that, you need to get it delineated from Army Corps. We don't know what they're gonna do now, because like the Sackets, it showed a little blue spot on that as wetland, and Supreme Court unanimously said that's not a wetland. So if Bonner County now tries to come up and try to say that that's a wetland.
Did they clarify, did they say that's not a wetland or that's not from the jurisdiction of the US?
It's not a jurisdiction.
Yeah, they never said it's not a wetland.
Right, well, that's what I meant, it's not jurisdictional.
So, I mean, that's very clear distinction.
Right.
That's gotta be made, and that's the issue. There are still
Wax like
wetlands
it's
out there
wax
that
like
are
it's
not
not.
under the federal eye. What do we do
All
with that?
all the Supreme Court, not all, but what they did was they defined federal jurisdiction.
Federal jurisdiction.
But that's the thing is if we try to take that on ourselves, Bonner County's been taking on a whole lot of liability.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
a
we
whole
have
lot
to
of
have a whole staff of wetland biologists to, on and on and on.
Well, that's why we need other,
Right, we have to rely on subject matter experts as our backup.
I don't think a lot changes on our end, irrespective of how long it takes to get this resolved, the new wetland map to come up. Because when somebody comes to us with a project and it shows a wetland on it and they say, well, you don't have the ability, and they tell us that you don't have the ability to ask me to set back my building from this wetland, we'll have to tell them to get a wetland delineation and take it to Army Corps of Engineers and let them decide whether they will have jurisdiction over that or not. And if the Army Corps of Engineers comes back and says, yes, we have jurisdiction, then we have the ability to request setbacks from that. If Army Corps of Engineers says, no, we don't have any jurisdiction on it, then the applicant has the ability to fill it up without requiring any permits, and we won't have the ability to ask for setbacks.
well, why? Why would we not?
Because there won't be a wetland. If the Army Corps of
No, what
Engineers
they're-
says,
No, I don't think so, because under this new regime, it just wouldn't be protected under the Clean Water.
which means the applicant has the ability to fill up those wetlands without a 404 permit.
No.
Yes, they do.
I'm not sure.
That's a
I'm not
travesty.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
sure
And
that.
I think that should not
guarantee
be
that
part of their
Hollywood-
land use plan. I mean,
It's not our plan though. It's not our plan. Our regulations remain the same.
if the federal government is saying it's non-jurisdictional, if the state is saying it's non-jurisdictional or they're silent, does that mean that we're forced to be silent?
No, we are not. That's what I'm saying. Our land use regulations are not changing. We still require setbacks from wetlands, as we always do.
Okay.
But if the body that defines wetlands says that these are non-jurisdictional, then the applicant has the ability to fill those wetlands without a
No, I go
404
back to-
permit from the federal agency,
I
which
go back
means
to Don's comment, saying it's not within our jurisdiction doesn't make it a wetland go away. It's still a wetland.
In principle, and I'm
That's what
not
she's saying.
advocating for this
That's
at all, but in principle, we could have a definition of wetlands, and we could define them and establish setback
Actually,
requirements to
it's
them,
pretty well defined in here
Right.
in this text.
even if it's a wetland that the
who will
federal government.
who will define it? Who
Bonner
will
County.
define it and who will regulate it?
Well, that's what we don't know.
And enforce
I'm
it.
just saying in principle,
Okay.
in principle. I'm
In-
not suggesting we
yes,
do that,
yes,
but
in
in principle,
principle,
we could do that.
Some government agency can define wetlands, but who will
Somebody
it
other
be?
than, somebody other than the federal government.
Who will be other than the federal government right now in Idaho? The state doesn't do it. Is Bonner County ready to do it?
Well, the thing is
No,
too-
I mean, Bonner County's not able to
Racing
do
on
a
the
lot of
Clean Water
things,
Act for
obviously.
50 years.
So-
So then-
So
Yeah,
let
we
us-
can't even do short-term rentals,
But
let
then,
alone.
but if we are not able to do it, if we are not able to define wetlands ourselves, that is where our jurisdiction ends. enforcing what the federal government shows on the map.
So when we get there, Mr. Chair,
That's only this way the
to,
code's written today.
to this text on wetlands, it pretty well describes what a wetland is.
Of course, that's easy.
Well,
So when we
Yeah,
see
I mean,
it's a
I think-
wetland and someone says it's not a wetland, what's the county gonna do?
so this is a comprehensive plan, right? So what we can put in the, we're not writing code.
No,
We're not writing code that, but we can write in there that regardless of federal jurisdiction, that a wetland needs to be considered in land use decisions. We can say that.
So we don't, so we, right now, we don't define wetlands, right, outside of what we get from the, from US Fish and Wildlife map. If we find a wetland on the property, and Army Corps of Engineers says we are not going to, we don't have any jurisdiction over it, we are not going to regulate it, do whatever you want with it. The applicant comes back to his property, he fills it up, because he doesn't need a 404 permit anymore, right? 404
Right, but we
permit
don't
comes
have to give
from,
it- We don't, I mean, theoretically, we don't have to give it a permit.
that's exactly what I'm saying. We
He doesn't
don't,
need
we
one
don't
today.
have the ability to stop the applicant from filling up those wetlands because we don't regulate them.
I understand that. But I think,
Can we?
yeah, sure, why not?
How
County
can,
code.
how can we stop them from filling up a wetland that the federal government doesn't regulate?
Because the state does.
No, the state
guarantee
does
you
not.
California
There's
That's
nothing
the
in state
problem.
code
I'm
that
sure
protects,
Washington does too.
there's nothing in Idaho code that protects wetlands.
Exactly, that's
Right.
the problem.
So if there isn't,
but,
then we
you
have
know, but-
nothing to
but-
base our requirement to stay away from wetlands on.
We don't
I
issue
understand all that.
permits
I
to fill
understand
up
all that,
wetlands
but
and we don't issue permits to not fill them up or
Or to sit back.
I don't think we need to resolve this tonight, but the issue here is a new one. Yeah, before, okay, on the Sackett property, the EPA defined it as a wetlands because there was a ditch. It was a stupid move by the EPA. And bad facts make interesting law.
Did they
So
follow-
that's what happened here. The EPA was definitely overreaching. And you can tell that by, this was a 9-0 decision on reversing the Sackett deal. So even
Actually, it was
the
5-4.
liberals on the court agreed that
Wasn't
that
9-0,
Sackett
it
was
was
not a
5-4.
wetlands.
Well, it was 5-4.
it was 5-4.
They agreed that the Clean Water Act didn't apply. So
Yeah.
9-0. But they had a lot of different discussions about what a wetlands might be and whether adjacent and adjoining and had all that kind of stuff in there. And then, of course, the liberals had a different view. And Justice Thomas had a different view from all the others, but
So
all that to say that
unless
I
Bonner
don't know
County
what the
hires
state of
a,
Idaho is going to do. I don't know what the state of Idaho is going to do. With regard to this, I
So
would
unless
think
Bonner
that,
County
I would think
hires
that they're
a-
going to do something.
I want to go back to what you said, Mr. Chair, that we'll address wetlands when we get to it. But and I think we should be doing a comprehensive plan here that acknowledges wetlands and their importance and the uses that they provide, in that context. Whether the county can or cannot or will not allow them to be filled in is not really we need to be discussing.
Right, I think the most we can do is we can say they need to be considered.
They're in here, and actually there's pretty well defined in that chapter of wetlands, and they're talking about, 12, 15,000 acres of
Right,
wetlands,
so the reason
identified
we're talking-
wetlands by the Corps of Engineers.
The reason we're talking about it is because it's in that first chapter. I started this by saying, I think we need to defer the discussion of it until we get some
I agree.
clarification.
Let's move on.
And I was hoping that the Army Corps would show up today, and they didn't, so. I just think that I think we need to, get your assignment, Dave, I don't think you need to do it at this point.
Thank you. Just if anybody's communicating with them, I think one of the first interesting questions for the Army Corps might be, do they have any idea what percentage of the wetlands of Bonner County are going to drop out of their jurisdiction as a result of this?
Exactly.
Right? Because I'm guessing a lot of the ones that we talked, whatever the number was, 11,000 acres or 15,000 acres that's adjacent to Lake Pend Oreille, they're still going to be in the Army Corps' jurisdiction. I would,
Maybe.
you don't think so?
Well, I was, yeah,
It's pretty easy to show a hydrologic
If you
connection.
looked at the maps that were, where did those maps come from? That showed the high,
NWI.
no, it showed the wetlands in different colors.
Yeah.
And,
National Wetland
yeah,
Inventory.
so
NWI.
if you look at that, there's a couple of isolated ones here and there. They're, let's say in the southwest, but anything around Ponderay or Priest, they're still.
Oh,
Yeah, they're adjoining.
Yeah, and they're, but maybe also adjacent.
They're also
Well,
adjacent.
Jason, here's what's very interesting. After that whole thing came down, about a week later, I got hit and sent a public, actually, they call it FOI, Freedom of Information, to U.S. Army Corps. And I think I mentioned this at our last meeting. The very next morning, about 8 in the morning, my phone rings, and it's he's a counsel for U.S. Army Corps Walla Walla, our area. And he's their attorney. He called me. I was like, I never expected a phone call from someone like this. And so, I said, I'm assuming you've read that. Well, yeah, we read it. He said, we've been working on that for some time now. And he said, it's nothing really new because every time they have a change in presidents, they're changing everything. It happens. So he said, it's not a surprise. But I asked him specifically because in that decision, they're talking about in order to be considered waters of the U.S., it has to be adjoining a navigable water for interstate commerce. And I asked him, and because that was one of the things in the opinion
that was just Thomas.
Is it just Thomas? Yeah, because I thought it was in the very first.
Now, the reason that Thomas wrote a concurring opinion is because he thought that even the interpretation of the majority opinion didn't recognize that not restricting it to interstate bodies of water meant that it wasn't covered under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, so it should have been regulated. But that just ignores all these 80 some years of jurisdiction, jurisprudence, that starts with the New Deal.
Well, right. Well, and that's why I asked him. I said,
As it should, but that's a different question.
So maybe, like, point blank asked him, Priest Lake and Ponderay Lake, are they interstate commerce? Are they navigable for interstate commerce?
Even Ponderay isn't because of the dams, right?
Well, yeah, because
It might be.
they stay in their ordinary state, so that's
Yeah.
a pre-dam.
Yeah.
And he said he's not aware of Priest Lake or Ponderay Lake being considered interstate. And then he went on and said, those can only be decided by a federal court. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I have no idea. Who knows where any of this is going?
Well, if you look though at a broad definition, a broad perspective from a continuous surface connection, Upper Priest River originates in Canada. And it flows into the Lower Priest, Upper Priest, Lower Priest, and the Priest River. So theoretically, you've got an international connection. So that would apply.
Water level.
And then you've got the same thing with Ponderay with the Clark Brook River, because that originates in Montana. So
Oh, I agree.
there's going to be a pretty broad definition.
That's going to be crazy.
Chairman
Have you
Stockton?
resolved this?
No, but I just wanted to speak to the interstate commerce part because I think you were there at that presentation about the fur trade. I mean, the fur trade was certainly interstate commerce. I don't know if the gentleman on the
Interstate
phone-
commerce has been a very elastic concept.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep going here. Let's go to, so we're going to eliminate chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 5, that's fisheries. Chapter 5 is,
We're not gonna eliminate it, he's gonna incorporate it into chapter 1, right?
right, but it's not going to be a separate chapter.
Right, he's gonna incorporate it
Yes,
into
you're right.
uses.
Yeah, he's going to say there's fish
Right,
and streams.
okay.
Wildlife, what's your thought on that? That's chapter 5.
What page are you on? You're going so fast, I'm trying to track you down.
I'm trying to get through it. It's page 88.
88.
So with regard to that, my deletions only start with table 5, which is if you go to heading 5.2 waterfowl. I started eliminating all that because it doesn't,
Keep on.
it's just dated information and doesn't
There you
from a land use standpoint. To the extent that we're supposed to do with wildlife, this basically, I mean, there's a lot of in here, like under white-tailed deer, it's got American Indians believe the moon, the wind, I guess that, they don't really need that. A lot of good historical information, but
Yeah,
doesn't really.
worthless.
It's our comp plan. For some reason, I left that there.
Died to Bonner County.
Seriously, it's like 30s New Deal federal guide to the West.
So actually, I would eliminate all the stuff about, what the American Indians did.
I just keep in the first paragraph, the introductory paragraph, the rest of it can kind of go by the wayside.
Oh, the white-tailed deer, yeah. I think all we had to do is just recognize that it exists.
Just here's a list of wildlife.
I mean, again, it's gotta come back to uses, right? So what are the uses
Is
of the wildlife?
wildlife-
It's
They're edible.
mainly recreation.
Go back to 6508. Is wildlife listed as one of the things, the natural resources?
I don't remember, it's
Let's go up and look.
Check. Keep checking back against that paragraph. It is.
Yeah. Fisheries is on that too.
No, you eat.
What do those guys think? Anyway, all right, so it's there, so.
So I think
Simple
I think
recap of
what we
they
need
are.
to do is we just need to recognize, we need to list them, our species that are, within Bonner County. We don't need elk or a
that's
member of the deer
that's it.
family, Native Americans, Shawnee, all of them walk through that. I mean, I don't know how to do this with land use.
Wapiti.
Wapiti?
Wapiti.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wapiti. So I would just, I can eliminate this more, but actually Mike eliminated a lot of this, so.
Well, yeah, but I'm all for eliminating more.
I eliminated, under bears, I eliminated the number of black bears and so on, I'm sure that's right.
Approximately 630,000 American black bears live in 42 states. What do you do? Thanks a lot. So when you build your house over there in Flagstone, don't forget that. It'd be happy on your wall. Picture of-
But don't forget, don't forget 11 Canadian provinces.
So on these, now with some guidance from the commission, I'll go through this wildlife one and tear it down. So we'll have that available with the next meeting.
Yeah, like bighorn sheep, yada, yada, yada. None are known to currently exist in Barnett County. I've never seen a bighorn.
Thank you.
See, Jennifer?
Bye.
Jennifer. So you're probably eliminating bighorn sheep.
We don't have bighorn sheep?
I don't think so.
No. They all live in wetlands and they're gone, so.
Are they over?
Are there none in the Green Monarch?
No, those are just mountain goats.
Mountain goats only.
Okay.
But not bighorn sheep. They're over at
This side
Thompson
of-
Falls.
This side of, Thompson Falls.
So, okay, so.
I don't think the Coeur d'Alene's have any. And now you might have to throw in a rattlesnake, because supposedly a dog got bit at Priest Lake.
What is up
Have
with
you ever heard of
that?
rattlesnake being up there?
No kidding.
Yes,
I have never heard about it.
Cat rattlesnake.
outside of Coolin supposedly.
I think it probably got somebody.
Came in on somebody's.
I think the veterinarian said it was a rattlesnake, Alan.
Really?
Species,
But maybe it got into somebody, but they don't have rattlesnakes.
Ah.
oh,
The veterinarian
Yeah, it's like
said
a
it was a
tiger.
rattlesnake and they're waiting for an
Oh, I know
anti-venom
that.
serum.
where'd it come from? Not native.
All right, I know we have wild turkeys.
Yeah, we sure do.
Drink that, don't you?
That's gonna be the problem, is identifying it. Somebody's gonna say, what about the blah, 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 blah? You know, and what's the criteria for
Snail larders.
listing wildlife?
Well, we should only be addressing
The use.
those that have clear uses that we want to talk about.
That seems to be the rule, so that's gonna be subjective as well.
And I would also suggest the way we write it, we we don't pretend that our lists are necessarily exhaustive. Right? There are several, you could write things like, there's several big game species in Bonner County, including boom, 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 boom,
But
boom.
not inclusive.
Right.
Yeah, we can not limited to. That old chestnut.
All right, so okay, and I take a crack at editing this.
At your beaver shut up. Bonner County.
Really?
Are you kidding me?
Somebody's pet is.
Something got loose somewhere along the line.
Is a mountain lion known as a panther?
It is in some parts of the country, but not in Idaho. If you
Cougar, isn't it?
mostly here, yes. That's the
I mean, I'm from
colloquial term.
the Beaches.
Back east, they're called panthers. Yeah.
We need to have a study on that.
Show me the latest Wolverine picture of Bonner
Okay, so that's, the last chapter we were supposed to consider today was beaches. Really excited.
Find one in California.
Which one?
Beaches.
Chapter 7, beaches.
That's also 65 on that.
Yeah, believe it or
Or
not.
65 words.
What?
It's in
It's
the
in there,
list.
it's in the list.
It's in the list.
I mean, just because it's in the list doesn't mean it needs its own chapter, so long as it's incorporated in the
Yeah,
discussion.
it could be in passing, or even to say, something, a little thing about beaches. Beaches are either private or public. The public beaches located in the unincorporated area are, and they're regulated by the state or Corps of Engineers, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah, I think we could write a paragraph about it, but I don't think it needs to be more than about 4 or 5 sentences.
that's about it.
Well, the beaches, yeah, well,
Yeah.
this is like the shortest chapter of
Good. Somebody has
that's
that
climate change, or climate.
So on the animals, are you going to be doing 5.8 critical habitat too? Okay. That's where I wish fishing, actually goes fishing and wildlife. See, I go fishing game, don't have the ability to declare an endangered or critical species. Only U.S. Fish and Wildlife can. Your section
Well,
16.
yeah, because they have to identify it as an endangered species first.
Right, right.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, easy one is white-tailed deer. I don't care if it's marine or not, they're not endangered order. You want me to come talk with this?
Yeah, I've actually researched this topic a bit, so after.
Good.
We've had a couple of conversations about it. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife does have like a Esri-based map that shows like where the critical wildlife habitat map is located, like where there's located specific critical wildlife habitat for endangered species. So we've actually added that to our internal map for planners. So when we're evaluating land use files, we can turn on that map and see exactly what critical wildlife habitat is, where it's located at. So the only thing we have right now in this county that's mapped is bull trout, and there's a couple of lakes we have, right? And then a number of streams that go to the lakes. So other than that, we have a list of potential endangered species throughout the county, but that's the only mapped area we have is bull trout. So
What wildlife species are?
I'd have to pull up the map, because you can click on like a polygon, and it'll tell you like, it might have wolverine, it might have Canadian lynx, I think is another one. There's a big habitat in Montana for the lynx.
I think the only ones I know of is, I think the lynx and then the woodland caribou, if they ever existed.
Yeah, we don't have any of that mapped in Bonner County. Nope, not anymore.
Well, they closed a bunch of trails in Priest Lake because of the woodland caribou a few years ago.
Yeah, but recently they said, no, Canada and US together said they're all in Canada.
So then the other, in this particular chapter, lists grizzly bears as endangered, which I don't think so. There's a whole lot of areas.
Yeah, well, and Idaho's in the process of being delisted right now.
So I want to suggest we strike all of chapter 9.
Which one's chapter 9?
It's on global
What page?
page. Let's get back up
I
there.
have reached out to U.S. Fish and Game, or sorry, U.S. Fish and Wildlife probably 5 or 6 times, left lots of voicemails, sent emails, and they've yet to contact me.
It's easy to just tell them that you accidentally shot a grizzly bear.
Oh, okay.
And they'll be all over you. Lights and sirens.
I'll say it was attacking my dog or something.
There you go. No, it was eating the bull trout.
Okay.
There you go.
Be here in a half hour.
I didn't know which one to shoot, so I had to pick one. Chapter 9 is just general statistics.
You
It
said
talks
that,
about
yeah.
snowfall, rainfall. It has nothing to do with, it's just statistics, which are all frost days,
Yeah, and it's,
cloud patterns,
That's 30-year-old now.
climate has a very different context.
temperatures, means, and extremes.
I agree, that's eliminated.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
okay,
agree.
9's
Well,
out.
You're gonna get a whole lot of kickback, pushback from a whole bunch of people.
You don't
What's
wanna-
the title
you
of
don't wanna talk
chapter?
about-
Hey, we're just making a
Climate.
recommendation.
Climate.
Yeah, but this is all statistics.
I know, but they want to say, should there be,
What's the time?
number one, climate is not listed in 6508. But we've had a number of requests from people over the last 2 or 3 years to look at, consider climate, global warming. If we don't do something along those lines,
It's not listed in the charge,
it's true.
so we don't need to do it, and if someone wants to, what
We're not
does
right, we're writing a comp plan, not a
have to
geography
do with
textbook.
land use? General statistics,
That are 30 years old.
but I am concerned about cloud patterns,
Okay.
just for the record.
So as I looked into it 2 years ago, when the people brought it to this commission saying, why aren't you considering climate change?
It's
I looked
not
into
land
it,
use.
these different outfits had dealt with a few counties, I think 3 counties in the state and a whole bunch of cities. And all it ended up with was those codes, or those comp plans or codes said, you gotta increase density to keep the effects down, and things like that. So,
Actually, one of the comments, they referenced a U of I study.
right,
And I went and looked at it
Yep.
because some of the elements of that study in principle address things like the ag section, which I wrote, maybe even the economic section as well.
Yep.
And I'll be quite frank, I found it to be pretty much worthless. I mean, it said things like changing climate may affect the type of crops that can be grown successfully. Okay.
Yeah.
Even if you believe that to be 100% true, well, I guess in principle it is. If the climate changes enough, they're going to certainly change the types of crops that can be grown successfully. What are we going to do about it in terms of land use in Bonner County? Changing climate may challenge ski areas in terms of the
that's got very
length
little
of their
to
ski
do with,
season.
very little to do with land use regulation.
What are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
You know,
So
Schweitzer may have to build
we-
more snowmaking or something. I
are
don't
you,
know.
are you suggesting that we leave?
Well, I'm
Chapter
just
9
saying,
in?
let's have a good discussion about it
Okay.
with some informed information about it, even to the extent if we dare, support, bring in a couple of those people who are, quote, experts in their field and have advised other counties and cities in Idaho about that subject. Because again, as I researched their efforts and their fruit that they produced, even in climate change, it resulted in higher density. That's what, and one specific that came out of the U of I study, the county should endeavor to have higher density zoning.
Don, what chapter did you covered housing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's where, climate change should be. in
It
this
was
other-
suggested, that was strongly suggested by people that it be incorporated in the housing component, they didn't.
So we should,
Yeah, but the actual, what they're recommending, what they wanted, was they wanted every chapter
They
to
have
be
something
prefaced by
relevant.
climate change, which I don't.
I'll
It
just
just
go on
doesn't-
record now and say no.
Anyway,
Okay, so getting back to beaches,
I'll
what are we
second
doing
that.
with that?
I don't care what they think. Pardon me?
beaches was what subchapter, is it?
That's 7, that was one of the ones we were supposed to look at today.
Oh, it's a separate
I
chapter.
think we heard a consensus for 4 or 5 of those and sentences.
Is beaches on 6508?
Yes, unfortunately, somehow. Because it came out of California.
We've had the state.
Knows that one.
Well, why don't we just make the deletions,
Just is not there.
Beaches?
It's not there.
Yes, it is. Keep looking.
In the state code?
Yeah.
Are there natural resources?
Well, it's in our charge, it's in the charge up above beaches.
Yeah. Under natural resources, it's one of the listed
Oh,
things.
okay.
right,
I
so
see it.
why don't we,
You
why
didn't
don't
want
we,
it to be there.
why don't we just why don't we make the deletions that are already on here? And then we'll go back to it. It's only a couple of paragraphs.
It's very small.
Only a page. So I'm looking down here at chapter 8, which wasn't one of the things that we were going to talk about tonight, but now I see that that's where watersheds. It seems to me that this watershed discussion should be combined with water bodies.
The
Yeah.
8.2, you mean? Oh, I'm seeing.
But just chapter 8,
Yeah,
chapter 8
And
itself.
with regard to aquifers, do we have the water resources people? Are they coming ever?
They didn't respond.
So I've got another little interjection here. Last fall, I talked with Water Resources. I went down and visited the office, and I talked to a number of people, one of whom was Dan Sturgis. Dan has about, I think it was like 15 years' experience with water resources in southeast Idaho, where he and his crew monitored wells to look at water quantity and source. He came up here and discovered that there's no such animal around here to monitor wells, and he's trying to start a program. So I haven't talked with him since last fall, but he was talking with his superiors about doing that. And it's a process where you go to private well owners and you say, can we monitor your well for depth and so forth? Nothing to do with regulation, nothing to do with metering. And also to install. DEQ installed some 100 wells in southeast Idaho in order to monitor the water level, because it's so important. Now, you bring up DEQ's or Idaho Water Resources webpage, and it shows a picture of crop circles in southeast Idaho. The entirety of the picture is crop circles. Guess what? Water is really important down there. Well, it's important here too. It was never a problem here because it was abundant. Now it's beginning to be a problem.
Yakima County is under total control and was examined for 10 years by USGS. So
Yeah.
we don't want to go there.
We're in Idaho.
I know, we don't want to go there.
No, okay, well,
But you were saying they want to come in and start monitoring wells?
as a means of determining what the impact of development is. If you've only got so much water in the ground, is that a limiting factor for development? Yes, it is.
Apparently
not. Yes, it is.
Not.
Well, Yakima County
Like
does
Phoenix
limit
and LA.
development now.
Well, I know, they keep bucking against it, and they keep saying, well, we're gonna borrow water. Now they're gonna borrow it from the Mississippi River. They send it to LA. Anyway, so anyway, Dan would be a person to get here, Dan Sturgis.
All right, so let's see if we can get him here. And then,
85.
and he can also discuss, I guess it's really the same subject, which is the aquifers.
Yeah.
But then I think we need to take the watershed discussions out of this and put it in.
I agree, it almost is these tables are almost like a lift and paste, I think. Yep. That's about all the information I wanted to have about the water resources.
Right, so maybe
The
we
square
just-
miles is fine.
Let's define the watershed part here with
Water resources?
the water bodies.
Are we on, what chapter are you on, 8.2?
It's 8.1, 8. Eight, I guess 8, mainly 8.1. 8.1 is watersheds and 8.2 is aquifers.
I think we start telling these agencies that we're having trouble is that, if they don't want to have any input into our comprehensive plan, that's fine, but we'll just do it without it.
We can try reaching out to other people. I may not have all the contacts, but if you guys are already in touch with some people, I can reach out to them.
Why don't you reach out to the guy that Don?
Yeah. I'll reach out to them. Yeah, feel free to share any email contacts that you have or phone numbers that you have for any people in the agencies that you know. I will contact them and invite them for the next meetings. So for the next meeting, do we want to have, I'll invite Dan Sturgis from IDWR. Who else do we want to invite? EPA?
Yeah, if
Army Corps, I've sent them 3 emails already.
maybe not just me,
I think
maybe
they're
just
just,
somebody else.
they just
Okay.
Okay.
things on voicemail.
I will
Sure.
try to find some contacts.
I'll see if I can get a name.
What do we think about, where should aquifers go then? I agree with the water.
There should be another section somewhere, separate water bodies, that says spots about aquifers.
Put that in water resources as well.
Yeah, I think we do that. I don't see we didn't.
Maybe instead of water bodies, call it water resources.
Yeah.
But I don't know that
One day.
I don't know that we know enough about.
Oh, I don't, I agree with that completely. I think we need help from somebody, probably IDWR, but I don't really.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would think
I mean, there's some information in here, which, I mean, I assume it probably doesn't change too much over time. There's probably more information than we need also, I would agree. I just glanced through it real quickly, but, so I can take a look at that. And
I'll see if I can get a name for water resources too. Well, you got that one.
Well, yeah, and according to the website, Dan Sturgis is listed as the number 2 person in the Coeur d'Alene office, so,
Okay,
you know, he's got on towards 20 years experience in water resources.
okay. So let's contact them.
And I left him a voice message 2 days ago, we talked about it today. He probably got it today, being back in the office today, because they weren't yesterday, so there's no way that he could be here tonight. But if you extend an invitation.
Oh, yeah, totally. For the next meeting and or the meeting after that.
So, the other, it looks to me like the main chapter that we haven't touched is soils. We need to have that discussion with somebody. I guess that Idaho
Soils
State
and
agency.
Minerals. What was that?
and vegetation.
yeah, we didn't talk about vegetation.
Soils, minerals, and vegetation. Two of those.
So who do we talk to about vegetation?
US Forest Service.
Yeah, but,
Idaho Department of Lands.
yeah, Department of Lands would probably be the best, in my opinion.
We did talk to Idaho Department of Lands. We can invite them again if you have.
Didn't they come in the night the DEQ came in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did, but we were talking mostly about timber, I think.
Vegetation's not in the
List.
list, the charge.
Well, good. We'll take it out.
The magical list.
Goes from, I don't know, what, range?
Yeah, range, we don't have any official range in Bonner County. That's
Well,
all
it
south.
doesn't talk about vegetation, but it talks about forests.
Right.
So,
Also, we'll talk about
Is that-
forest,
is
not
that the-
vegetation.
yeah,
Yeah, and forests are covered.
That's a separate
in this
chapter.
present.
but I think isn't that mostly what's in the current vegetation chapter?
Well, maybe.
Yeah, because there is no grassland, there is no range, so.
Where is it?
It talks a little bit about other vegetation.
Somebody want to take vegetation and see what we should, I haven't really read that, so.
Well, I did once. Where is it?
Yeah, what page you're?
What page is vegetation on?
Chapter 2.
Page, page number?
I don't-
Can you scroll over to the, yeah, see that?
Um,
Tell me what page it is.
It's on, it starts on page 56,
Okay.
chapter 2.
The first chapter is a big one.
Yeah, a lot of it's big chapter on forests.
So
Pasture.
chapter 2 is titled vegetation and then starts talking about forests.
It does talk about other things further on.
But forest, I think, is a separate component of the list.
Yeah.
It's one of the specific.
So I would strike the word vegetation and just start with forests.
Yeah,
And then drop pasture range,
Because,
cropland, to
you know,
whatever extent it needs to be discussed in the soil section.
or an ag.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of ag-related data in
Yeah.
here, but we covered a lot of that
Yeah.
in the ag
In the
section,
ag
so
section,
I don't think we
ag
need to
component,
repeat it.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting to the point now where we're getting, this wall crossover.
Just understandable, but
So Mike made a lot of deletions in that vegetation chapter. All of it. Well, most of it. Well, let's make these changes that Mike made, and then we can look at that clean slate.
So would you like me to produce one document that incorporates all of your drafts?
Yes.
And then I'll send it out and then you can make more changes on it?
But I think we already agreed to just clean this up and delete what you deleted.
That's what she's gonna do. She's gonna
Yeah.
clean it up.
So we don't want to see all the strikeouts. We'll just clean it up with what says deletions, and mine, and yours weren't deletions, yours were.
Mostly, I did some deletions and then I got
Okay, any
frustrated with that and
deletions, just
started
take
just
them
making
out.
comments.
And we'll
Would you
start.
like me to incorporate yours and Don's?
Mine,
John didn't really do that.
no, I didn't
This is
have,
more of a narrative.
right, and it's more just, philosophy.
So just the deletions, just an update.
Well, and Dave's is gonna become a chapter.
Yeah, I think what I would like is an original somewhere that I can cut and paste from as needed. Because I'm gonna write from scratch. I'm not gonna try to do this by deleting and adding to this, because it's a wholesale change. So, but there is some good information in here. So if there's an original somewhere that in Word that I can grab from, that would be good.
I'll send it to you.
So, then you're gonna incorporate the watershed.
Yeah. That actually looks like that's what I wanted to do. I never got this far in the document. So.
All right.
I'll try to work on, chapter 2, the forest vegetation thing. And then it goes into rangeland. I mean, it's kind of all over the place. Or did you go through that as well?
I did not.
Huh?
No.
So I won't.
Well, I guess I did to some extent. I took out the chapter 2, table 2.4, I took it out. The main thing. Or 1997.
I mean, we can leave it and do it later, I guess.
So let me clean up the draft and send you a clean copy and then you can start working on it.
Right, that'll be nice. It'll be 80 pages instead of 153.
I have a feeling it's gonna be a lot less.
I hope you're right.
Me too. Just remember that the entire comprehensive plan for Boundary County is 6 pages. Not the natural resources, the entire one.
For Boundary County?
one more page than Idaho County.
They must not have wetlands.
Everything.
Or climate change?
Or panthers.
Climate change, none of that.
All right, so,
They have different
we got,
patterns.
I think we're making progress. So let's do that, and then how are we doing on the public services? Are we getting any better response?
Not a single, you have? No, because I just looked at it again today, not even a single response that's come from the
No,
last
it's-
2 months.
I need to reach out to them again.
Yeah, we need to,
I need to reach out to the
Or
agencies.
make a phone call or something.
There's 160 phone calls. And I don't even have a phone number. They're not a phone number. I called some of them and got a good response. Reached out.
Their eyes,
Folks don't have.
they get cataracts.
Granite reader response? Pardon? The granite reader response. Reader response?
Oh, yeah, did Granite Bay reader? I don't think.
Granite reader.
I don't think they did.
I'll go knock on their door.
You know, when we get done with this, we're all gonna have cataracts.
Already had them. All right, so,
Can you get them twice out?
all right, so anything else we need to discuss tonight?
Agenda items for next month.
Just to confirm what agencies I'm requesting to be here next time. IDWR again and one more agency, EPA,
We have Army Corps.
Army Corps again.
We'll make some phone calls and see if we can get them.
So, I don't think we need IDL to come back, do we, for?
Well, if we want to talk about vegetation, forestry.
You tell the
I don't
Army
know,
Corps
we're
we're
thinking about taking the dam down. See what they say.
I don't know if I supported that. You have the information that IDL gave us before?
Yeah.
So you might give that to Mike, so we can put it in there. So we're done with that then. So we will work on, Jake, we will work on that recommendation to the county commissioners. I'll work on that with you.
We'll add it as an action item for next month or for next meeting. It says a letter recommendation on compliance for short-term rentals or something like that.
Yeah, so
Draft up a letter.
should we talk to Decker between now and then?
Yeah, and it might not be a bad idea to reach out to another. I'm sure there's a number of these. The reason there's one other one I did a demo on last year sometime. I don't recall who it was though. But Decker is who City of Sandpoint uses. So I could swing by again. They had started to implement it last time I went by there, so now it's been 6 months, so I can kind of see what their pains have been in the last 6 months up there.
Yeah,
Salesmen are great, but then practicality is really what it comes down to.
So maybe find out exactly what services they're using, and then see how satisfied they are.
Sure. I can do that.
All right, so we'll work on that. Swady's gonna clean up this draft, and then Dave's gonna work on that. Mike's gonna work on vegetation or timber, I guess. And anything else?
So first off, we don't have another meeting until the 18th of July, right?
Yeah, because 4th of July would have
obviously
been.
we're not gonna be.
Okay, so you guys want to schedule a different meeting for the beginning of July, or?
Are you sure? I mean, that's a good long time to work on it.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I have a month
I
more or
didn't
less.
volunteer to take on any of those because one of my paying jobs is requiring a whole lot of my time.
You have a
The
paying
next
job?
month, yeah.
I have a question,
And,
Jake.
So I'm kind of begging off. If I can, I'll look at one of those chapters in natural resources. That is,
Just let us know what that is.
Yeah,
So we don't duplicate it.
Website.
I have a question, Jake, and that is, I listened to the Hammond deal at the county commissioners, and the Hammond brought up our recommendation, and it was trying to get that, but I didn't see that in the staff report. I didn't see that what our recommendation was in the staff report. I just missed that.
It was in there. It's near the last 2 or 3
It's
pages.
just above the motions typically.
Yeah, it's right above the motions. It'll be, typically we have a staff conclusion. In this case, we didn't do a staff conclusion. And then we have a recommendation and using a box and bold.
Yeah, I just think that maybe the recommendation of planning commission should be a little more prominent.
Yes, also send a
Yeah,
decision letter.
we send in your decision letter right after, like the week after your guys' hearing. So they have, the first thing they get before they get our staff report is like a 2 or 3 page letter with your conclusions of law, your findings of fact, and then your motions that you make. So yes.
All right.
We could include those in the staff report as an exhibit, but it's already included in the file and they already have it in their inbox. So we've considered like publishing those on our website, but I haven't made that determination yet.
Planning commission actions?
Just any decision letters, because anything that we do, this body, the hearing examiner, the zoning commission, and the board, all those have decision letters that are included as part of the official record. It's all signed by the chair of each one.
I think you ought to consider putting it on the website because I know I got some comments from folks in that area that wondered, where's the planning commission letter and stuff. So.
Yeah.
So when it says in our motions now for the last year anyway, where it says, and we direct the planning department
to da-da-da-da.
Planning staff to
For
draft
people
findings.
who, I forget the phrase, but it's for concerned parties or whatever.
Interested.
Interested parties.
Interested parties. So does that apply to public?
If they ask for it, they can get it.
They can get it, right, but it's not posted, the decisions aren't posted.
Right.
That's what we're talking about, though.
Right,
It's posting it to the website.
Yeah, okay, so every decision that would be posted to the website for that file.
The
Right.
final decisions are posted, we just,
We haven't posted any decision letters or letters of recommendation.
Since ours is a recommendation, it's not the final decision.
No, but it's our
It's
recommendation.
our recommendation.
It's your decision, yeah.
That should be a public record.
Yeah, yeah, I thought so.
It's a public record, it's just how available is it to the public, right? So I don't see a harm in it, other than it gives Jen another task to do, so.
Well, you know, I think that, you know, for instance, the Hammond one, we had this room was full.
Yep.
And
Every one of their hearings has that factor.
I mean, ours was, so I mean, it seems to me that it's something that should be.
The zoning commission one was, this one was,
Historical CC.
Yeah,
they
so
have
the-
4
Commissioners
packed hearings
decided.
going on 5 next week.
Yeah, so they denied it 2-1.
This neighborhood.
The Hammond, and then the zone changes on Monday.
No, they've got the zone change is, they continued last week to next week.
Monday.
It's on the
They're
26th.
not gonna do his own change.
They have to hold the
There's-
hearing,
they
due
have to have-
process.
Yeah, they have to follow through with the process,
So
but
you think they're
yeah,
gonna buy
there's pretty
Jeremy's,
much no point for it at this point.
Jeremy's, position that the zoning and the comp plan don't have to match.
I'm sure he'll make that argument.
Yeah, there's Bassler, Ferguson, Bone.
There's a lot of cases.
There's a lot of cases, and there's 4 or 5 in the Idaho Land Use Manual.
It says they don't have to.
That says they don't have to.
Not outright carte blanche, black and white.
So the state code.
So we're adjourned?
You want to adjourn the hearing?
Are we adjourned,
Yeah,
Mr.
we
Chair?
Yeah, so we're adjourned until, was it July?
July
18?
18.
July 18th. Wow,
I know.
vacation.
Yep, vacation.
I don't know what you're gonna do with
The
yourself.
highway, 1500 Highway 2, first floor.
I believe we're down here again. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't.
And, it'll be